Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution, and Zelensky has gone rogue, y'all. Denied Trump any resources. Trying to start his own European army, say he do with them suckers in the U.S. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all.
That a group of European countries are quietly working on a plan to send troops into Ukraine to help enforce any future peace settlement with Russia. Led by Britain and France, they were said to be exploring the kind of force that might be needed for Ukraine about a year ago. But the urgency for a concrete plan has grown amid concern that Trump might go over their heads and possibly even Ukraine's to clinch a deal with Putin. With Trump yet to reveal the full details of his Ukraine peace plan, many questions remain unanswered. But the most crucial of them all, what role will the United States play in bringing peace to Ukraine? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The American President Donald Trump's call to his Russian counterpart has left Europe scrambling for options, and Ukraine is left really nervous. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has declined Donald Trump's offer to acquire about half of the former's mineral reserves to pay for all the assistance that is being provided during the war. The Ukrainian president has said that the U.S. minerals deal must be linked to Ukraine's security guarantees. And our next report tells you how Donald Trump has stunned his allies with a peace plan for Ukraine.
Zelensky is saying you're not getting shit unless you fight the Russians. You want resources, you fight the Russians. You don't want to fight the Russians, then we're going to go to the Europeans and see if they want to fight the Russians.
I have no question. In fact, Melania, here you go.
Trying to cut Trump out on some
As the brutal war in Ukraine enters its third year, the frustration mounts along the front lines. Outnumbered and outgunned by relentless Russian assaults, Ukraine's military is struggling with low morale and desertion. President Donald Trump's call to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, has only deepened a sense of betrayal. Ukrainian soldiers fear the US is handing over easy concessions to Putin after years of costly fighting.
The US has handed over shit.
The consequences will be catastrophic. We will keep losing. We are paying a high price now, and it will be even higher. I don't even know how the price can be any higher. I have lost many.
These clowns pay the price for being puppets for the West. They didn't have to be puppets of the West. Why you didn't tell the Azov Battalion you didn't want Nazi living in your country? Now they want to whine at. See, now it's going to be blame America. That's what they setting this up for you. Blame America. America's the reason Ukraine lost. Only if they would have gave Ukraine all the weapons. We gave them all the fucking weapons. Only if they gave them hundreds of billions, we gave them that too. What are you? We sent, and the real truth is, we sent thousands of mercenaries from NATO. You still couldn't do nothing. These people crying, they wanted us to fight the Russians for them. That ain't happening.
Many friends during this time, people I served with. I don't want to lose more people, brothers and sisters in arms.
I think it will be chaos. The fighters, the guys who are now fighting for our land, for pieces of our land, I think they won't listen to Zelensky, and we will keep pushing, because this is our land.
Very interesting that soldiers say they're not going to listen to Zelensky. They're going to keep fighting. We'll keep fighting.
We give it to someone just because they took it. I don't think it is going to work out.
With the US calling time on its support for Ukraine and European allies, President Zelensky is bargaining hard to get back all land seized by Putin.
Members of the Ukrainian delegation.
The Ukrainian president has set out conditions for a meeting with Putin, saying there will be no peace plan without consensus of the US and Europe.
And really what we need to.
But amid the contradictory messages from the White House, Zelensky's sense of isolation is all too apparent.
See, this fool think he gonna play Europe against the US, but Donald Trump bashing Europe right now, which they need to do, put them in their place. They some flunkies in some service. I love to see Trump treating them European phonies like the puppets that they are. They don't like that, but this gives Zelensky the weasel opportunity to weasel his way in. And like he's saying, okay, y'all won't let me in NATO. Well, me and Europe is going to start a strong European army. This absolutely might happen. There ain't going to be a strong army. There's still some punks. But then they might try to have that war with Russia, this European war.
Everything needed to protect lives in modern war should be produced in Europe fully. Europe has everything it takes. Europe just needs to come together and start acting in a way that no one can say no to Europe. Boss it round or threat it like a pushover.
Do you see here? No one can say no to Europe. Boss them around, push them, saying that y'all getting bullied by Trump. See, he think he a tough guy. He the only person that'll stand up to Russia, and he's gonna use that. And now he's saying, look, the U.S. is pushing us out in the cold. We got to come together to fight the Russians. Now, I'm already fighting the Russians. Y'all should come over and help me. That's his only, but he's offering them minerals that he don't even have.
Trump's shift in priorities is also posing doubts over Europe's security. Reports state that a group of European countries are quietly working on a plan to send troops into Ukraine to help enforce any future peace settlement with Russia. Led by Britain and France, they were said to be exploring the kind of force that might be needed for Ukraine about a year ago. But the urgency for a concrete plan has grown amid concern that Trump might go over the heads and possibly even Ukraine's to clinch a deal with Putin. With Trump yet to reveal the full details of his Ukraine peace plan, many questions remain unanswered. But the most crucial of them all, what role will the United States play in bringing peace to Ukraine? Bureau Report, WION, World.
They weren't talking no peace. Now peace on the table, they crying. And Zelensky is trying to turn the U.S. allies against him. The U.S. better pay attention to what Zelensky doing. Salute. Zelensky want to be the head of the European army.
Let's be honest, now we can't rule out the possibility that America might say no to Europe on issues that threaten it. Many leaders have talked about Europe that needs its own military, an army,
dangerous.
An army of Europe. And I really believe that time has come.
The time has come. The time has come for Europe to follow him. So this is a cold joker right here, full of coat. The time has come for Europe to follow Zelensky and make the European army strong to fight Russia. And remember, he already fighting Russians, so just come on over to Ukraine and help him, damn it. But he wants to be the leader of this.
Europe must be created. This is 3 years of full-scale war have proven that we already have the foundation for a united European military force. No. And now, as we fight this war...
There hasn't been no full-scale war. See, they like to get away with that lie. No, this have not been a full-scale war. This haven't even been a war. This has been a special military operation. Y'all terrorists. Russia dealing with y'all like y'all Al-Qaeda. Y'all ain't seen no goddamn war yet, boy. You don't want to see no war with Russia. You remember that.
And lay the groundwork for peace and security, we must build the armed forces of Europe so that Europe's future depends only on Europeans. And decisions about Europe are made.
Oh, you heard that disrespect? See, these niggas, I told you, boy, they pissed. Trump really pissed these people off over there, bro. I've been paying attention. Europe right now, they are ready to do their own thing. Watch, they finna do all kind of business with China now. Watch what happens. But they is pissed that J.D. Vance went over there and told them that it's not real democracies. They trying to, and they not. They go against anybody who they don't like that get elected. Then they say they Russian influence. So J.D. Vance really called them out on that and said, hey, man, you can't just, that's like what happened with Hamas. Y'all don't like Hamas? You can't say they can't rule Gaza. He won't say that, but I'm saying it. You cannot say people who elected like Maduro is undemocratic. No, the people elected him. See, that's real democracy. Whoever wins, wins. But they didn't like that. And Germany and all of they've been talking about they're going to have their own democracy without the U.S. butting into their business. But Zelensky like, the hell with democracy because he's a dictator. Let's just talk about the fight with Russia.
In Europe. And without a European army, that is impossible. Once again, this isn't about replacing the alliance. This is about making Europe's contribution to our partnership equal to America's. And with involvement from American businesses. A few days ago, President Trump told me about his conversation with Putin. Not once did he mention that America needs Europe at the table. That says a lot. The old days are over when America...
This dude petty. Not once did he mention you. I saw you hearing that to divide Europe and America, but they don't need that because Trump already doing that. But he's there to be the leader of Europe. And those other phony politicians in Europe, they better realize that what y'all did this. Every dictator who popped up leading the army that tried, a lot of them that tried this shit. And they're going to have to face this man. He still has an army. And they done told him he's a hero. He's great like Churchill. You know, that's what they told this man. So now he's saying, hey, forget about the U.S. I talked to him on the phone. They didn't even say y'all need to be at the table. So I'm choosing y'all over the U.S. That's a lie. You mad that Trump said he could trust Putin and he really don't trust you because you coked up too much. You high all the time.
America supported Europe just because it always had. And this is not
just... If the CIA don't got Zelensky doing this shit, boy, they're going to bump Zelensky out for this, what he's trying to do right now. He done stole $100 billion too. And then blamed it on Joe Biden. They'll kill him for that. Joe Biden, like, damn, I took 10 billion, but you took 100? Joe said, yeah, I took 10. I told y'all I'm taking 10%.
15th of December, and this is my second video update of the day. Desperation reaches high limits, my friends, because Volodymyr Zelensky has just called for the creation of a European army. He's making these statements in the light of the United States, making it crystal clear that they will not support the European Union or the Kiev regime in this madness going forward. Also, we then have Mr. Lindsey Graham. I know he's a favorite of yours. He's basically trying to find a way to activate the tripwire. Oh, we're going to get to that. And then we have Viktor Orban, who's basically saying to the European Union, if you don't stop it now, this will become your Afghanistan. My friends, we have this and many others. It's going to be a busy episode, so let's get right to it. Zelensky calls for creation of European...
That's what's so crazy, because you got Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary. He's in NATO. He's part of the European Union, but he's in NATO. And he keep telling them, boy, y'all know we can't beat no Russia. Why y'all playing these games? I done already made a deal with Putin, so he don't attack me. But if a president inside of NATO in Europe is saying, y'all need to stop this, y'all know y'all get your ass kicked, why they won't listen to him? That's crazy. Because it's a scam. It's a scam for forever wars, but they picked the wrong war because Putin ain't got time for no forever war to steal trillions from their tax base.
Army, Armed Forces of Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky proposed forming a joint European armed forces with Ukraine's participation, saying the era of relying on the US is over. Quote, many leaders have talked about Europe that needs its own military, an army of Europe.
No BS. Zelensky got the best, besides Russia, Zelensky got the best military in Europe right now. None of them is trained. None of them can say they fought no fucking Russians. They troops died as mercenaries, but Zelensky army, they getting their butt kicked, but they fought the Russians. They know drone warfare. Those other European nations, they don't know shit about no drone warfare. They've watched. So Zelensky got the upper hand with Britain, Germany, France. They got to listen to him about how to fight Russia. That's real talk. He can always say, y'all ain't fought no fucking, and he's doing that. Y'all ain't fought no Russians. That's what he told him last year. He said, give me all of y'all military equipment. Y'all not fighting nobody. Why y'all talking about y'all might fight Russia? And this was actually true. I felt him on this. He said, I'm fighting Russia. Give me your shit.
I believe that time has come. The armed forces of Europe must be created. To me, this sounds like desperation has just reached a high peak. And the reason I'm saying that, the creation of a European army, it involves certain costs which will be impossible to bear by the Europeans in the current state of Europe. It's just not feasible. Then you also need people. Now, that brings me to a point I was wanting to make for a long time. Who do you think will be willing to be part of this army, especially since the face of it seems to be our green t-shirt? I mean, these people, they talk without thinking it through. And this is why I'm saying that's a sign of desperation, because when you're desperate, you say things without really assessing it. This is just a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that the United States said that they're not going to support this endeavor going forward. Frustration dictates what they're saying at this current point in time. And I can only hope that sooner rather than later, reason will prevail. Low chance, but there's still a chance. Quote, money is needed, yes, but money alone won't stop an enemy assault. Well, you've learned that the hard way. People and weapons don't come for free. But again, it's not just about budgets. It's about people realizing the need to defend their own home. People do want to defend their own home, except the problem is not where he says the problem is. I must go back to the speech I've covered in the previous episode earlier on today. J.D. Vance said that in his opinion, and in the opinions of many of us, the threat is not Russia or China at this point in time for Europe. The threat is much, much closer to home. And this is why Volodymyr Zelensky sounds so disconnected from anything that all of us can relate to. And when I say all of us, maybe I should say many of us. Zelensky argued that without Ukraine's army, Europe's armies would not be sufficient to stop Russia, highlighting that only Ukraine's forces in Europe possess real, modern battlefield experience. Quote, but our army alone is not enough too. We need what you can provide. Weapons, training, sanctions, financing, political pressure, and unity.
That's the truth. And ain't no getting around that. That's what Zelensky sitting at the table, and them people got to hold their head down in shame. They're scared to fight Russia. At least he was brave, dumb enough. But the Ukrainians were dumb enough, but they fought the Russians. They got their dismantled, and Putin still going to light on them, but they still fought the Russians. Britain's scared to death. They've been backstabbing France. You want to do it. Germany, they want U.S. itching to do it, but they don't want to cross that line. So Zelensky can sit in the room with all of them and tell them that they paper soldiers. You only fought the Taliban. You listen to us. We'll tell you about the Russians.
Was always a big believer in a very simple principle. An army, any army, is only as strong as the very principle they are trying to defend.
They created this
money, as Volodymyr Zelensky rightly says, won't stop an enemy assault. But also, money isn't enough to drive people to be part of an armed forces that fights for things that many of those same people don't believe in. Again, this is all a good example of not thinking things through. And not thinking things through is exactly what has put Europe in the current state of affairs that it finds itself in today. Quote, if the Americans themselves decide to go that way, decreasing their presence, it's not good, it's dangerous, but we all in Europe need to be ready. Quote, we need confidence in our strength so that others have no choice but to respect Europe's power. And without a European army, that is impossible. Once again, Europe needs its own armed forces. Not exactly. The only entity who needs a European army is the same person giving this speech, the green t-shirt. He's the one who needs a European armed forces. Nobody else does. Zelensky also addressed NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Quote, Mark, my friend, this isn't about replacing the alliance. This is about making Europe's contribution to our partnership equal to America's. That is total nonsense. This is not about making an equal partnership to America's. This is about him saving his own backside. I've said it yesterday. For him, once it gets down to the negotiating table, there will be no good outcome. He will be stuck in between a rock and a hard place. And I've explained it at length yesterday. This is why he's trying to delay as much as possible any sort of peace negotiations. I've heard Ursula von der Leyen, this is just as a side note, I've heard Ursula von der Leyen at the Munich Security Conference giving a 30-minute speech or so. It was painful, by the way. The way she led that speech, this is what she started with. Russia and Ukraine, and only Russia and Ukraine. It looked in stark contrast with what J.D. Vance was just talking about. Like I said, people, when there's a glitch in the matrix, they always revert back to the default setting, back to the default propaganda. And this is exactly what we hear from the green t-shirt. Now, let's move on to Lindsey Graham. Speaking of propaganda and all, US Senator Graham offers alternative to Ukraine's accession to NATO. The US Senate is considering the idea of providing Ukraine with a scheme for rapid accession to NATO as a security guarantee in the event of a new Russian attack. Quote, I've got an idea. Comes from The Art of the Deal, Trump's book. If we can't agree that they should be in NATO like right now, can we agree that if there's ever another invasion, the moment they invade, they go into NATO? Let Putin put him in NATO if he wants to. Well, this surely sounds like a Lindsey Graham type of idea, no doubt. However, the Russians will reject this right off the bat. Why? Because this, by the way, when I read this, do you know how long it took me before the words false flag came into my mind? About 3 seconds. This is exactly what this leads to and invites to, a false flag operation. This is why the Russians will never agree to this, because it's far too dangerous. But again, Lindsey Graham, I mean, he's not famous for having any other sort of ideas than this perfect exemplification here. Quote, I think we'll let Putin know that if he ever does this again, Ukraine going into NATO really quick. And if he invades again, they go into NATO. That means we all fight to defend Ukraine. Who is we? Everybody keeps talking about we, but it looks to me that the situation is actually very clear. The United States, and by the way, NATO is the United States. There is no NATO without the United States. The United States is not how should we put it? Is not being led by Lindsey Graham or by anybody else. It's being led by Donald Trump, at least for the next 4 years. And Donald Trump made it clear that fighting for Ukraine is definitely not on the menu. So who is we? Let's continue, because now we have something very revealing here. Notably, the current NATO enlargement scheme does not provide for a guaranteed quick accession, as the parliaments of all allied states must vote in favor of the new member. Of course, because NATO was never an alliance created with the sole purpose of being able to just usher in new members whenever the situation dictates. No, it has its own processes and its own procedures. But Lindsey Graham says, well, know what? We can forget all of that. We can just rewrite it. You know, that's what we do. When we don't like the law or our processes that we have designed, well, we're just going to change them. This gives you a sneak peek into the mindset of these people. This is what they have been doing for the longest time. When they get to an obstacle, let's say it's a legislative obstacle, well, do you think they have do you think they lose a lot of sleep over it? Of course not. They just take the pen, their writing hand, and then they just rewrite it. It's simple. Let's move on to the next article. Viktor Orban. War in Ukraine could become Afghanistan for EU, says Viktor Orban. Quote, if President Donald Trump is not able to find a solution, that war could become easily an Afghanistan for the European Union, Orban said, comparing the situation in Ukraine to the 20-year US military operation in Afghanistan. Quote, endless war, endless conflict, no way out of the conflict, eating up energy, human lives, money, everything, destroying the frame of normal life for the European Union. We are in serious danger, he continued. Of course, this is all true, but the problem is that the people who lead the European Union, they don't care if it's going to be an Afghanistan or 5 Afghanistans, because they are not the ones paying for the outcome. It's the European people, the European citizens who will eventually end up paying for this Afghanistan. That's the tragedy here, because you see, in the United States, yes, they've spent, I think, some trillions on the Afghanistan war. But you know what? At least in the United States, people could point out very easily to the elected people who have made those decisions. In Europe, though, you can't really do that, because the people who lead the European Union are not exactly your leaders who you elected. That's the tragedy here. But now let's take a look at this final quote, because this is the cherry on top. Quote, the difficulty is how to convince the Russians to stop the war while the Russians are basically winning. This is Viktor Orban trying to tell the Europeans that, look, Donald Trump has to make some difficult concessions because those people, the Russians, are actually winning. They're not going to stop unless you give them quite a big carrot. That's really what he's saying. But these people in Brussels, of course, ideology takes over, reason goes out the window, never to be seen again, and then this is the end result. Let's move on to Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal, Ukraine may have shot down its F-16 over summer due to the US overcautiousness. The Wall Street Journal has published a column on the probable cause of the F-16 fighter jet crash that resulted in the death of pilot Oleksiy Mes on the 26th of August 2024. The newspaper writes that it was friendly fire from a Patriot air defense system, although Ukraine has not officially reported this. This sounds like Putin propaganda. Ask me how I know that. Well, it's simple. We've been saying the same thing, you and I, on the channel back in August last year, and everybody in the mainstream media called this version Russian propaganda. Of course not. It was the Russians who have shot that plane down, absolutely, or it was a malfunction. But no, it couldn't have been the Patriot system. Of course it was the Patriot system. But the bigger question is, why does this information come out now? Well, it's because in Washington there's a new sheriff in town, which basically makes me think that the United States knew this all along. They just decided to pocket this information, not make it public, because, you know, we don't want to make the Ukrainians or the Biden administration look bad. So we're just going to keep it silent. However, Donald Trump says, no, publish that information. Let people know what actually happened. And like this, there will be so many more other things that we will get in due course. Things that you and I have said that were labeled as misinformation, propaganda, you know how it goes. Eventually, the Trump administration will say, well, no, actually, this is what happened. My friends, let's just go to the last article before we conclude this episode. Ukraine was proposed to give 50% ownership of mineral resources to United States, and Zelensky refused, reports NBC News. Sources said that the Trump administration had proposed that Ukraine give the United States 50% ownership of the country's rare earth minerals. In addition, the US made it clear that it would be ready to deploy US troops to protect the minerals if an agreement was reached with Russia to end the war. During his speech on Friday at the security conference, Zelensky said his lawyers would review the document best and present it to him in Kiev with advice and some changes. He called the proposal a memorandum between the US and Ukraine, not a security agreement. According to 3 US officials, many of Ukraine's mineral resources are located in areas now controlled by Russian forces. I'm not going to spend too much time discussing the mineral resources because it's not it's not something that will have a huge impact on this conflict either way. The only people that this will impact, well, it will be the Americans and the Ukrainians, but not the overall frame of the conflict. However, what I think it's important is the final line that we get from this article. Many of those resources are under Russian control. So, like I said a few days ago, Zelensky, when he said that the only concrete money that he can offer to the United States is basically money he doesn't have because the Russians are sitting on top of it, well, my friends, I'll end the episode here.
As you know, on February 12, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump held a telephone conversation that lasted an hour and a half. This fact came as a real shock to Europe, especially to Britain and France. While European leaders were preparing for the Munich Security Conference, calling for a resolution of the Ukrainian crisis without Russia's participation, US President Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin and discussed the future fate of Ukraine with his Russian counterpart. Of course, the phone conversation between Trump and Putin can be considered a victory for the Russian leader, and the humiliation of Europe, which, with its short-sighted policies, has completely lost respect and influence on the world stage. Seeing everything that is happening, it becomes clear that Europe never learns from its past mistakes. The fact that Europe has been left out of the current negotiation process on the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict is Europe's fault and its short-sighted policy. The fact that the United States and Russia have begun discussing a resolution of the Ukrainian crisis without the participation of such leading European states as France, Britain, and Germany is a real humiliation and a crushing blow to the image of the whole of Europe. And only Europe itself is to blame for this. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that in September 1939, it was the short-sighted policies of European countries, including Britain, that led to the outbreak of World War II. And now, 86 years later, Russia and the United States will once again eliminate this another mess in Europe, as they did in 1945, at the Yalta Conference. Back then, Winston Churchill admitted that Britain did not decide anything at this conference, and that the fate of Europe was entirely in the hands of Russia and the United States. Later in his memoirs, Winston Churchill admitted that he felt like a small and defenseless donkey between a huge Russian bear and an American buffalo, at the Yalta Conference and during conversations at Tehran. However, if in the 1940s, Russia and the United States invited Britain to negotiations, to create the illusion of Europe's presence during crucial decisions, now in the 21st century, Americans and Russians have chosen to exclude European countries from resolving the current conflict in modern Europe. Moreover, everything that is happening indicates that even representatives of Ukraine will not have any voting rights during the discussion of the peace plan, proposed by Russia and the United States. Representatives of the Ukrainian authorities will be present at the talks only to agree and accept the decision that Washington and Moscow will make. By the way, a few hours ago, sources in Washington confirmed that the Trump administration agreed with Vladimir Putin's demand that the current head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, is not the legitimate president of Ukraine, and that he does not have the legal right to sign important state documents. In this regard, Washington has begun to prepare Ukraine for the election of a new head of state. It is reported that for the presidential elections in Ukraine, a document on a temporary ceasefire will be signed by Kiev and Moscow. And to sign such an important document, the Trump administration is considering the candidacy of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Alexander Syrsky. According to Washington, General Syrsky will sign a ceasefire agreement. Moreover, he will also give guarantees that during the presidential elections, the Ukrainian army will not violate the ceasefire. At the same time, insiders in Washington also stated that the Trump administration nominated General Valery Zaluzhny for the office of President of Ukraine. It is reported that it is precisely Valery Zaluzhny who will sign a peace treaty with Russia, as a result of which the current war will end. Moreover, the Trump administration has admitted that according to this peace treaty, Ukraine will have to lose its territories in any case. In particular, the special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, acknowledged that Ukraine would lose a significant part of its territory. At the same time, he stressed that Western countries would not be obliged to recognize these territories as part of the Russian Federation. Moreover, on February 11th, during an interview with Fox News, U.S. President Donald Trump did not rule out that the whole of Ukraine could become part of Russia, and that in this regard, he intends to return all the money of American taxpayers invested in the Kiev regime.
Hundreds of billions of dollars. And, you know, they may make a deal, they may not make a deal, they may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, but we're going to have all this money in there. And I say, I want it back. And I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth. And they've essentially agreed to do that. So at least we don't feel stupid. Otherwise, we're stupid. I said to them, we have to get something. We can't get.
Zelensky say, hell no. He giving it money. He giving money to Europe, or Europe will fight the Russians.
Continue to pay this money.
This statement by Donald Trump completely undermined the psychological state of the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky. In particular, insiders in Kiev confirmed that Zelensky experienced a genuine nervous breakdown and hysteria on February 12. It is reported that he calmed down only after French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called him. It is reported that they promised Zelensky not to abandon him and continue to fight not only against Putin, but also Trump.
Never fight puppets.
Moreover, the next day, French President Emmanuel Macron officially declared that Donald Trump's contacts with Vladimir Putin are a real betrayal on the part of the United States, and that in this regard, Europe should take its future and the future of Ukraine into its own hands. The French leaders stressed that the betrayal of the United States was a real shock to all Europeans, and that in this regard, EU countries should do everything possible not to capitulate to Russia. According to Macron, if peace is achieved in Ukraine without Zelensky's involvement in the negotiation process, it will represent a real capitulation not only for Kiev, but also for Europe. Against this backdrop, Zelensky decided to disrupt Trump's peace initiatives. This dead man walking intends to continue fighting with the support of Paris, London, and Brussels. This political clown understands perfectly well that any peace agreement on the cessation of hostilities will be his death sentence, as the people of Ukraine will not forgive him for the loss of territories, the loss of more than 1 million soldiers, and a huge monetary debt that Kiev will have to pay to Washington. However, the continuation of hostilities may end with the complete disappearance of Ukraine, since in this case, the Russian army will have to reach the western borders of this Eastern European country. Nevertheless, Zelensky doesn't seem to care about this. The main thing for him now is to save his own worthless life.
Be a rocket science. You could just read the Taliban is classified, and if you don't know, the Taliban's in charge of Afghanistan. They're classified as a specially designated global.
There's a lot of countries talking about what this U.S. representative just did in the House of Congress, where he exposed the U.S. for funding the Taliban, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al Qaeda, Al Shabaab. This is on record, and they're talking about this. This should be on the motherfucking news, but they don't want to talk about it. We done ran that story plenty of times. We know Barack Obama, what he did. We know what Hillary Clinton did, but we know the U.S. government has been funding these terrorist organizations. But now, since they're going after the USAID group, he's telling everybody and putting it on the record that none of these groups would exist or be able to fund themselves without the U.S. government.
Terrorist organization by OFAC. So post 2021, so this is last year, 2024, we spent $697 million of the taxpayers' dollars in Afghanistan, including $534,719,000 in change from USAID in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Sarajuddin Haqqani. The Haqqani network mean anything to anybody in the room? How about Abdullah bin Laden? Who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding.
Exposed them.
You now recognize Representative Perry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. USAID was created through executive order in 1961 by President Kennedy, long having lost and strayed from its mission, lost its direction. Even the Clinton administration tried unsuccessfully to reform it. And we spend, I don't know, somewhere between $40 and $50 billion annually on this organization. And with the things that you hear, well, many of us, probably most of us in this room, agree with projecting America's power for the good of all the world around the globe. Quite honestly, if our enemies were asked to design a foreign aid program that would actively undermine the United States of America at maximum cost to the taxpayer, they would be hard-pressed to create a scheme more effective than USAID. That's shocking to say, but I just, it's, look, let's just go to a couple things here. We left Afghanistan, and I'll just I'll characterize it as left in August of 2021. August of 2020. So the Taliban's in charge. Taliban threatens the lives of the NGO personnel distributing USAID. They claim credit for USAID distribution. They interfere with the distribution of USAID aid. They tax the beneficiary of the aid. They tax the delivery service. They steal the food commodities. They divert the funds. They extort citizens for protection for USAID aid. They create sham procurement schemes, and they threaten the lives of those who oppose those schemes. Now, that all occurred before August of 2021, when we were there. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You could just read the Taliban is classified. And if you don't know, the Taliban's in charge of Afghanistan. They're classified as a specially designated global terrorist organization by OFAC. So post 2021, so this is last year, 2024, we spent $697 million of the taxpayers' dollars in Afghanistan, including $534,719,000 in change from USAID in Afghanistan. I don't know what we think we're going to change in Afghanistan. We lost 22,000, lost or wounded 22,500 Americans in Afghanistan over the course of our term there in the war, spending over $2 trillion. We're just going to keep on spending because somehow we think it's going to get better. And if you're wondering who's in charge of Afghanistan getting the money, and that money I just mentioned, the $697 million is on top of, and is in addition to the weekly to every 10-day shipments in cash of $40 to $80 million. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Sarayuddin Haqqani. The Haqqani network mean anything to anybody in the room? How about Abdullah bin Laden? Who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding. If you think that the program under Operation Enduring Sentinel, entitled Women's Scholarship Endowment, which receives $60 million annually, or the Young Women Lead, which gets about $5 million annually, is going to women who, by the way, if you read the Inspector General's report, is telling you that the Taliban does not allow women to speak in public. Yet somehow you're believing, and American people are supposed to believe, that this money is going for the betterment of the women in Afghanistan. It is not. We're funding terrorism, and it's coming through USAID. And it's not just Afghanistan, because Pakistan's right next door. USAID spent $840 million in the last 20 years on Pakistan's education-related program. It includes $136 million to build 120 schools, of which there is zero evidence that any of them were built. Why would there be any evidence? The Inspector General can't get in to see them. But you know what? We doubled down and spent $20 million from USAID to create educational television programs for children unable to attend the physical school. Yeah, they can't attend it because it doesn't exist. You paid for it. Somebody else got the money. You are paying for terrorism. This has got to end. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. And
but Perry's recent statements in a revelation that has sparked intense debate across Africa and beyond. U.S. Congressman Scott Perry has accused the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, of funding certain groups that have sown chaos across the continent. Perry's claims, made during the inaugural hearing of the Subcommittee on Department of Government Efficiency, have reignited concerns over the true motives behind American aid and its long-term impact on African nations. During the hearing titled "The War on Waste," stamping out the scourge of improper payments and fraud.
These motherfuckers been doing in Africa, shipping in, acting like they shipping in much needed humanitarian aid in the rebel control areas, but it be guns, bombs, drones, night vision goggles, All that bulletproof vest. Yeah, then they airlift all kind of other little shit to them. Yes, that's why the U.S. be pushing to get much needed humanitarian aid into any area that the rebels, the terrorists, is in. Yeah, they rearm.
Perry stated that USAID had been funneling vast sums of money into entities linked to extreme groups, including Boko Haram, which is very active in Africa. According to him, U.S. taxpayers
did that, bro. Obama created Boko Haram. And the African said that he created Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. There was no fucking Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab till Obama came in power, killed Gaddafi. Then there was a Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab that was kidnapping little black girls in Nigeria. And Nigeria was saying this. And they blamed Obama. They're like, man, this is y'all people. Why y'all doing this to us? All of a sudden, they got extreme. It wasn't always extremist, fundamentalist, radical Islamists in Africa. Since the days of Muhammad, they ain't had no problem like that in hundreds of years, bro. Until Obama and them decided they want to put AFRICOM in to rule Africa. You see, the next thing you know, anywhere these terrorists is at, then they say, hey, let us come in and help you fight these terrorists. The terrorists was trying to go wherever the resources was at, wherever the minerals was at. The terrorists all of a sudden knew how to extract these minerals. They knew where the black market was at for these minerals. Come on, man.
Are unknowingly supporting these rogue elements to the tune of $697 million annually, along with unmonitored shipments of cash into various regions. He further pointed out that USAID had allocated $136 million to construct 120 schools in Pakistan, yet there was zero evidence of these schools ever being built. This is not the first time that USAID has been accused of engaging in controversial activities. The agency, which operates under the guise of humanitarian assistance, has long been suspected of playing a more insidious role in global geopolitics. Critics argue that its operations often align too closely with U.S. strategic interests, undermining sovereignty and fostering instability in nations that refuse to fall in line with Washington's policies. The allegations come amidst broader efforts by U.S. President Donald Trump and his billionaire ally Elon Musk to curtail what they see as rampant government inefficiency. Musk, who Trump appointed to lead the Department of Government Efficiency, has been an outspoken critic of USAID, describing it as a viper's nest of radical left Marxists who hate America. He has vowed to dismantle the agency, arguing that it serves as a tool for clandestine operations rather than genuine development assistance. Trump himself has called for a radical restructuring of government agencies to eliminate wasteful expenditures and cut bureaucratic excess. If these allegations hold weight, it would confirm suspicions that many Africans have harbored for decades, that Western aid often comes with ulterior motives. The idea that U.S. funds could have been used to support elements responsible for widespread devastation in Africa is both infuriating and tragic. It raises uncomfortable questions about whether certain conflicts in Africa are not merely homegrown, but have, in fact...
When they say Iran is a state-sponsored terrorism, they a bold-faced lie. They the state sponsors of terrorism. But that's why nobody can take America out of West serious. France, state-sponsored terrorism. Zelensky, who is arming those terrorists in Africa. Anywhere Russia, remember, Russia is helping the African nations, and they're helping the terrorists. They're the state sponsors of terrorism. But you know what? That used to be a conspiracy theory, or they could have took my video down for misinformation. Until that U.S. congressman just went in there and read that out and said, y'all been funding ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Boko Haram. It's right there. All in your face, they've been doing it. They know what they've been doing. Lying to the American people the whole time. See, just looking at us big suckers. Arm the people that they say they got to fight. They got to keep these people. They got to keep these phony groups in the fight now. They got to keep them armed and trained and be able to fight. They don't give a damn if U.S. soldiers ain't. A lot of U.S. soldiers, they don't even be knowing they puppets. All the military-industrial complex, a lot of these politics, they in on it. You know, a lot of soldiers going to lose their goddamn life talking about they protecting America. Now, are you nuts? You playing a dangerous game, and now you've been exposed. You're helping the terrorists. See, some people got to be arrested for this shit. Yeah, you see the war on terrorism. And what war on terrorism when you funded the terrorists?
Fact, been exacerbated or even orchestrated by foreign powers. Take Nigeria as an example. In 2014, when the Nigerian government was engaged in a desperate battle against rogue elements, it publicly criticized the United States for refusing to sell it much-needed weapons. Adebowale Abidapo Adefoy, Nigeria's ambassador to the U.S. at the time, condemned Washington's hesitancy, arguing that Nigeria required more than just symbolic gestures of support. The U.S. justified its refusal by citing concerns over human rights violations within the Nigerian military.
These armies in Nigeria is a powerful army, but these terrorists had the weapons from Libya. You see, after they killed Gaddafi, they opened up Libya's weapon storages. Now these terrorists had advanced weapons. They could shoot down planes, hit tanks, plenty of guns, and rocket propelled. They had all that shit you ever needed. Start terrorizing Africa. Then Nigeria, like, damn, U.S., we friends, right? Could you sell us? Not could you fight for us? Could you sell us the weapons so we can fight these terrorists? Barack Obama and Biden, and especially Trump, they like, we ain't giving y'all no weapons. Y'all human rights violators. What? Yeah, so they trying to make sure you can't defend yourself. So all them African nations, they done woke up to, oh shit, you're not gonna defend us. You're not gonna fight these terrorists. You're just gonna steal our shit. Okay, that's why they sat back down with Putin, because not only will Putin arm you, but he will come help you defeat these damn terrorists that are playing these games.
This explanation did little to quell suspicions that America's true intentions were far more complex. Former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan later suggested that the U.S. had deliberately undermined his administration by withholding military assistance, thereby allowing these groups to gain ground in strategic territories. He believed this was part of a calculated effort to weaken his government, paving the way for a U.S.-favored leader to take office.
And they installed, first, he was a Christian. They got Goodluck Jonathan out. I remember that happened. They put in this Islamic leader. And I'm not saying he was working with Boko Haram, but he didn't fight Boko Haram off. Okay, then the CIA put the puppet that's in power right now, who is a known drug dealer. He's been exposed. He was money laundering in Chicago, lied about going to colleges in the United States. He's been exposed. He's a CIA asset who was sat on the throne of Nigeria. That's all been exposed. But it started with this plot right here. Goodluck Jonathan said the U.S. trying to weaken me so they can put their own puppets in power. And they're using these terrorists to weaken my administration. Yep, they absolutely did that.
For years, such claims have been dismissed as conspiracy theories, but Perry's recent statements lend new credibility to the idea that Africa's struggles with insecurity may have external architects. The implications of these revelations are profound. If USAID has indeed been complicit in funding destabilizing forces, then African nations must rethink their relationship with foreign aid. It is no secret that many of the so-called assistance programs come with strings attached. Loans and grants are often tied to policy conditions that prioritize foreign interests over local development. It is no coincidence that...
Then they start telling all of them they got to have gay rights. Obama was the first president to go tell them Africans they got to have gay rights, gay liberation, gay marriages in their countries. Yeah. He was the first one. Then that came with this. Oh, you ain't getting no AIDS prevention, even though we gave AIDS. No, we're not helping you feed nobody, even though we done caused all this chaos and all this poverty in your country, and we're stealing resources, unless you let us come in with our programs that is getting exposed right now. Drag shows. Yeah, you got to allow drag queen shows in your elementary school, or you ain't getting no U.S. money. Oh, hell no! You gotta have drag shows at your goddamn schools, your children's school, or you ain't getting no money.
The African nations rich in natural resources are frequently the most unstable. Where instability thrives, exploitation follows. The time has come for Africa to break this cycle. A continent that continues to rely on external aid will always be vulnerable to manipulation. The reality is that no foreign government will ever prioritize Africa's interests above its own. Therefore, the solution lies in self-sufficiency. Africa must invest in its own industries, strengthen regional cooperation, and build institutions that serve its people rather than foreign donors. It is also imperative for African nations to scrutinize the operations of international organizations operating within their borders. If Western entities are found to be contributing to instability, then they must be held accountable and, if necessary, expelled. The era of blind trust must end. Africa has the resources, the talent, and the resilience to forge its own path. What it needs now is the political will to stand firm against external forces that seek to keep it in a perpetual state of dependency and chaos. This is a wake-up call. The revelations surrounding USAID should serve as a rallying cry for a new era of African unity and self-determination. The continent has been a pawn in the games of global superpowers for far too long. Now is the time to reclaim its sovereignty, safeguard its people, and build a future free from the shackles of foreign interference. Your perspective matters. What do you make of the allegations that the Obama and Biden administrations were using USAID to fund certain groups destabilizing Africa? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments.
There's more breaking news that's coming in, and it's a big, big story we're breaking here on India today. It's a big revelation that comes after US President Donald Trump's crackdown on US aid. Where was that money going? Big, big story. One of the beneficiaries of US aid, which funds non-government organizations across the globe, was the Falai-Insaniyat Foundation, a front of a UN-designated banned terrorist organization called the Lashkar-e-Taiba. The FIF, or Falai-Insaniyat Foundation, and Lashkar-e-Taiba were directly involved in the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, in which 166 people were massacred by 10 Pakistani terrorists. Now, according to information accessed by India Today, in October 2021, USAID, US taxpayers' money, USAID provided $110,000 to an organization named the HHRB. Now, this is a Michigan-based Islamic charity, and this Michigan-based Islamic charity had ties with several radical Islamist terrorist organizations, including Pakistan's Falai-Insaniyat Foundation. Imagine, American citizens were killed in the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks in 2008, and in 2021, the Joe Biden administration in the United States of America in 2023, the USAID again.
This ain't on TV. Why the fuck the fake news not talking about the whole world talking about your ass been funding the terrorists? You can't hide it no more. The whole world talking about you. You've been funding the terrorists. You are behind it. Your fingerprints is on it. We know who the bag man is for the terrorists. It's the U.S. government. Imagine these bastards had the nerve to put it on record. That's disgusting. This is how disrespectful they don't even give a damn. They have it's a paper trail to them funding terrorism. That is disgusting, bro. They don't give a shit. Huh? They won't write tax, they won't get tax breaks for funding terrorism. Don't where they can get their piece of the pie if they make sure you write it all down so we can bill it to the Americans. To make sure they can bill it to us, they put this shit on paper. That's crazy.
Then gave $73,000 to this Michigan-based Islamist charity. It just goes on to show how US, that had put a $10 million bounty on Hafiz Muhammad Saeed in Pakistan through another agency, was actually paying the Falai-Insaniyat Foundation. And this just goes on to show, one, either the right hand in the United States did not know what the left is doing, or worse, as Donald Trump fears, the US deep state was involved in several operations And with information coming out from the...
It's not the U.S. government. It used to be the U.S. government didn't know what the CIA was doing. The CIA was doing this off the record. Don't put it on the books. Nobody know nothing. No, this is how the U.S. operate now. This is on the books. No, hell no. Congress goes over all of this. They got the receipts. They understand. No, this is on the books. They don't give a shit. They're funding terrorists all over the goddamn world, bro. Only if you submit to them, you won't have no problems. But if you don't submit to them, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, El-Shabaab, and democracy is coming to get your ass.
The United States of America, where was this money ultimately going? We'll be tracking that story very, very closely.
He met with Trump and the presser was quite bizarre. Now, what's really telling is Trump's reiterating his reciprocal tariff plan on the world, and he said it in front of India. And unless India lowers their import tax, they will get punished.
Well, India's been, to us, just about the highest tariffed nation anywhere in the world. They've been very strong on tariffs, and I don't blame them necessarily, but it's a different way of doing business. It's very hard to sell into India because they have trade barriers, very strong tariffs. India, whatever India charges, we charge them. So frankly, it no longer matters to us that much what they charge, because whatever they charge, I had discussions with India in the first term about the fact that their tariffs were very high, and I was unable to get a concession. So we're just going to do it the easy way, and we're just going to say whatever you charge, we charge. And I think that's fair for the people of the United States. And I think it's actually fair for India.
And it seems that India is kind of ready to make concessions to escape the tariffs. And it's important we understand the enormous pressure reciprocal tariffs have on India. They could be facing an overall increase in tariffs of 10%. That is very big and is on par with the punishments on China. Since India has tariffs on US goods, Trump wants to return the favor. And to avoid this, India is ready to make a deal. They are ready to negotiate with Trump. And this, of course, means buying more US LNG and oil. India buys around $15 billion worth of US energy, and they might want to raise the amount to $25 billion. As we mentioned before, the US understands Canada is going to be a serious energy competitor in the future. So Trump is making sure he seals all the deals he can during these next 4 years. So in the US perspective, this seems like a win over India, and India is part of BRICS, and that's why Trump is on a victory lap. His reciprocal tariffs are going to affect countries in the global south more than the G7. This map shows us which countries will suffer the biggest impact. Now focus on the regions in yellow and pink. We have Brazil, Argentina, large parts of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. Thanks to the reciprocal plan, they might suffer US import tariffs of at least 5% or more. Now, funny enough, China is in green because US tariffs on Chinese goods are higher than Chinese tariffs on US goods coming in. So Beijing would avoid reciprocal punishments. Emerging economies in Asia, however, and BRICS in general would be clobbered hardest. They will be squeezed by the US economy. Following India's example, we can expect quite a few countries to negotiate with the US, and it's going to be a very simple process here. Either they lower their tariffs on American goods, or they get on board and they start buying expensive US oil and gas. However, Trump has taken it to the next level. When asked about BRICS, he has declared it's over, that BRICS is dead. Now, obviously, I couldn't put that word in the title, but just listen to this.
Spoken against BRICS. India is part of BRICS. Do you want to dismantle BRICS, or you want to? US want to be part?
I don't care, but BRICS was put there for a bad purpose, and most of those people don't want it. They don't even want to talk about it now. They're afraid to talk about it because I told them if they want to play games with the dollar, then they're going to be hit with a 100% tariff. The day they mention that they want to do it, and they will come back and say, we beg you not to do this. BRICS is dead since I mentioned that. BRICS died the minute I mentioned that. And I remember when Obama and Biden in particular, I guess he said that, they have us over a barrel. They don't have us over a barrel. We have them over a barrel. If BRICS wants to play games, those countries won't trade with us. We won't trade with them. And if any trading gets through, it'll be 100% tariff at least.
So you can see that Trump is supremely confident about his 100% tariff threat on BRICS. If BRICS plays games with the dollar and de-dollarizes their trade, the US will punish their exports. Now, this is not the first time we heard of this, but Trump's reciprocal tariffs is likely a teaser to see how BRICS will react. Will they all cave or stand firm? Because if we look at the numbers, the US doesn't really have much leverage today. Despite the rhetoric, the US has an incredible trade record with the BRICS bloc. In 2022, trade between the US and BRICS went past $1 trillion. That's a lot of money on both sides. But as always, the devil is in the details. Now focus on the amount of imports the US buys from BRICS. They bought nearly $650 billion worth of goods from the bloc. The bulk of stuff was of course from China, but the majority of imports are industrial inputs and stuff like toys and games that end up at Walmart. So if Trump decides to impose a 100% tariff, he would be essentially declaring economic war. He would be imposing a currency crisis on BRICS, but the US economy would suffer from a bigger inflation crisis. Now, almost immediately, you'll see everything in stores double in price. Plus, US exports, especially in the auto industry, would be too expensive and uncompetitive. Now, in the short term, the dollar would of course strengthen and the currencies of the BRICS might collapse. Revenue would also take a significant hit, but so will the US. And this battle of attrition won't bode well for the US economy either. Now, since 1990, G7 economies have been declining in importance. Their share of global GDP peaked at 68%. During the same period, BRICS was hardly at 6%. But today, just the founding members of BRICS alone comprises 26% of the world economy. The G7 has fallen down to 43%. It tells us which economic bloc will have more production and demand power. And the US needs to trade with both to survive. Trump needs to buy cheap inputs from BRICS. US supply chains are decades behind. But he also needs growing markets to sell stuff too. The EU is in an economic crisis. Let's not forget about that. They don't have the spending power to buy. So in a realistic sense, this is one threat he can't follow through with. It's very empty because, like it or not, the world will continue to de-dollarize. Using the dollar as a proxy currency just doesn't make sense anymore. Looking at the currency markets, there's a growing speculation that Trump is just bluffing. Or maybe he's not, but he will realize the truth and do a U-turn. The movement of the dollar tells us everything that we need to know. Even after Trump declared reciprocal tariffs, the USD fell by 2.5%. The market is realizing, hey, maybe Trump isn't serious about his tariff wars. Maybe this is all a big ruse to get countries to negotiate. It's a big reason why assets like gold, they have been rising over the past few months. It's why even Chinese stocks are soaring. Investors are beginning to realize that maybe Trump is just doing one big elaborate bluff, which I hope he is, because the US can't afford total economic war with BRICS. And I hope you don't think the US can win this one, guys, because it's not possible. And we can see this admission from Trump itself. It's not often you get the US finally admitting they are spending too much, especially when it comes to their military adventures. Maintaining a ton of bases and troops plus funding Ukraine is very expensive. And that's why we have Trump himself asking Russia and China to de-escalate the security competition.
We have the greatest military equipment in the world. We're building it. At some point, when things settle down, I'm going to meet with China and I'm going to meet with Russia in particular, those two. And I'm going to say, there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on military. There's no reason for you to be spending $400 billion. China's going to be at 400 billion. We're at $1 trillion. We're going to be at close to $1 trillion. And I'm going to say, we can settle this on, we can spend this on other things. We don't have to spend this on military and I'm going to be meeting with China. You know, we were trying to.
Now, the plan is simple, but it's extremely radical. Trump wants the US, China, and Russia to all cut their military budget in half. Now, make no mistake, the US still wants to be world hegemon. But spending too much on defense is clearly an extreme burden on the US economy. And if you didn't know by now, the US spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. In 2022, their defense budget hit an incredible $877 billion. That's more than 3 times the defense spending of China, which has a bigger industrial economy. If you want to know why US supply chains are so underbuilt and why healthcare is in shambles, here's why. US domestic infrastructure is crumbling because too much money is spent on the military. Trump wants to revive America's industrial base, which is good for the US, but he can't do it while fighting endless wars and providing the Western world with defense under the security umbrella. So he's trying to convince Russia and China not to build up their militaries. And this will help the US save a ton of money that can be diverted to industrial growth. Now, there's a reason why Trump wants to pull out of Europe. The US contributes the lion's share of defense spending in NATO. Germany, France, and Italy, their combined spend only amounts to $150 billion. The US is nearly 6 times of that, coming in at $860 billion. That's a lot of money. It's almost half of last year's defense budget. But here's the problem. The last 4 years have seen the US confronting Russia and China non-stop. And now that they have the advantage, I find it hard for China or Russia to stop building their defense. And if that will happen to you, you can expect Moscow and Beijing to sit down and ask for more concessions. Halting their progress isn't really feasible. It isn't really the smartest move because Trump won't be in office forever. There are a lot of moving parts in the US deep state, especially when it comes to the military-industrial complex. They don't want US government defense spending to drop. It's their bread and butter. The US Defense Secretary himself wants defense spending to grow. Despite Trump and Musk wanting to cut spending, he wants a bigger military buildup. So there's a lot of issues within Washington itself. It's clear as day that there are still competing factions within the Trump administration. Now, according to the Chinese response, Beijing is willing, but they aren't stupid. They reminded Trump of how crazy US defense spending is. In 2025, it will reach nearly $900 billion, and that's around 40% of global military expenditure. And since the US advocates America first, then the US should take the lead by cutting their budget first. It's hilarious, but we can tell China is being extremely cautious. They don't want to be caught up on the back foot because when you lower military spending, at least for China, it also means setting back your tech progress. A lot of breakthroughs in the civilian industry also relies on government money to fund as well. Even if Trump is serious, China just doesn't believe him 100%. However, he has to do it. He has to find a way to claw back US deficit spending because it's simply unsustainable. It's going to be impossible to fight an economic war with BRICS without a ton of money to rebuild your supply chains. And good luck trying to issue more bonds to raise the money. There's a tsunami of supply, but not enough buyers. Over the last 4 months, the US budget deficit has hit an incredible $840 billion. And in January alone, this amount grew by $129 billion. The gap has widened by an insane 25%. And here's the crazy part. This is even before Trump confirmed his tariff war on the world. That's also before his tax cuts comes into effect. Imagine the trillions that have to be borrowed as revenue drops. Borrowing money from the world isn't a sustainable situation. Trump knows that. And everyone by now with an inkling of thought understands this as well. The US is officially caught between a rock and a hard place. But let me know what you think. Is Trump just blustering over tariffing BRICS? And will China or Russia cut defense spending for the US? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure
In early 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump announced plans to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, citing concerns over illegal immigration and drug trafficking. In response, Canada considered various retaliatory measures, including the possibility of reducing energy exports to the U.S. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau emphasized that nothing is off the table and advocated for a united national response. Ontario Premier Doug Ford supported strong retaliatory measures, suggesting the suspension of U.S. liquor imports and potential cuts to energy supplies to U.S. states like Michigan and New York. The U.S. and Canadian economies are deeply intertwined. U.S. crude oil. Recently, U.S. crude exports to China, effective February 10, 2025, with a significant portion of this being heavy crude essential for refineries in the Midwest and Rocky Mountain regions. Imposing tariffs or restricting oil exports could disrupt this supply chain, potentially leading to increased gasoline prices in the U.S. and economic challenges for Canada's energy-dependent provinces. Simultaneously, China has significantly reduced its imports of U.S. crude oil. Recently, U.S. crude exports to China decreased from 150.6 million barrels in the previous year to 81.9 million barrels. This decline is attributed to China's economic slowdown, a strategic shift towards renewable energy, and increased imports from alternative suppliers like Russia and Iran. In retaliation to U.S. tariffs, China announced additional levies on U.S. energy products, including a 10% tariff on crude oil and a 15% tariff on liquefied natural gas, LNG, and coal, effective February 10, 2025. While U.S. energy exports to China constitute a modest portion of China's total imports, these measures further strain the trade relationship between the two nations. In a dramatic shift in global energy trajectories, China's acquisition of U.S. crude oil has plummeted by almost 50%, reflecting not only its evolving energy priorities, but also a sweeping realignment of international oil dynamics. As a result, China slipped from being the second-largest purchaser of U.S. oil to ranking sixth. In this video, we discuss the main factors behind this significant decline and its broader impact on global oil markets. Long hailed as the world's largest oil importer, worked its purchasing strategies to obtain more favorable, has historically sourced crude from a diverse range of suppliers to meet its enormous energy demand. Yet recent studies indicate that China's overall crude imports dropped by roughly 7.2% year-over-year, attributable in part to sporadic COVID-19 lockdowns, plentiful domestic reserves, and planned refinery enhancements. In spite of this decline, China has reworked its purchasing strategies to obtain more favorable or flexible terms. Customs figures reveal a deliberate avoidance of some Western suppliers, highlighting Beijing's multifaceted pursuit of more affordable oil and improved energy security. According to recent Kepler data, the proportion of similarly, Iran, also under strengthening China's ties with politically isolated suppliers, 6%. Although a 2 percentage point rise might appear modest, it represents a significant real gain given China's enormous import volume, often exceeding 10 million barrels per day. Russia, pressured by Western sanctions, has offered substantial discounts on its Urals grade, appealing to Chinese refiners in search of lower feedstock costs. Similarly, Iran, also under U.S. embargoes, continues to ship crude to China using covert methods such as deactivating transponders or conducting ship-to-ship transfers near Malaysia or in the Gulf. Venezuela, heavily hampered by American sanctions, still manages exports through intricate payment routes and intermediaries, and its low prices remain attractive for smaller Chinese refineries. Overall, these cost-effective sources have compensated for part of the reduction in Western supplies while strengthening China's ties with politically isolated suppliers. The attraction to sanctioned or discounted suppliers from political instability. Moreover, the chance to expand considerations. Economically, Chinese refiners benefit from robust margins when acquiring crude at prices well below global averages. This allows them to either lower domestic fuel costs or boost shipments of refined products, particularly within Asia. Additionally, diversifying their supplier base enhances China's energy security by lessening dependence on any single source, thereby mitigating risks from political instability. Moreover, the chance to expand diplomatic and trade relationships with nations such as Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, keen to bypass Western embargoes, further motivates this realignment. This approach solidifies China's position as a key player prepared to operate outside Washington's sphere of influence. monitoring and trade flow complexities. The movement, nonetheless, the noticeable increase in such deliveries indicate analysts from Kepler, Vortexa, and other agencies use satellite imagery, AIS data, and port records to track vessel routes. These tools expose tactics like disabling AIS and conducting mid-ocean transfers, commonly near Malaysia, to mask the true origin of shipments. Chinese customs data might not accurately reflect Iranian or Venezuelan barrels, as some shipments are recorded as Malaysian or Omani. Nonetheless, the noticeable increase in such deliveries indicates a deliberate strategy to exploit pricing disparities. While a 2 percentage point change in the import mix might seem minor, it represents billions of dollars given China's enormous demand and alters global shipping lanes. This shift also forces established suppliers like Saudi Arabia, Angola, and Brazil to sometimes revise their official sale designations to maintain market share. Broader impacts on global oil markets. Sourcing triggers competitive pricing strategies. Prompt strategies not only secure more affordable supplies for China on deeply discounted shipments from embargoed sources calls into question the effectiveness of Western sanctions and exposes alternative channels that keep oil flowing. By opting for cheaper barrels, China has the ability to influence global price benchmarks and market sentiment, particularly if the trend continues. For traditional suppliers, China's focus on cost-effective sourcing triggers competitive pricing strategies, prompting adjustments in supply routes and contractual terms. This is especially critical for Russia, a key OPEC Plus member, as its discounted exports to China might undermine broader efforts to maintain higher prices. In the long run, stronger ties between China and politically isolated oil producers could reshape global alliances, reinforcing Beijing's role as a crucial oil buyer prepared to operate outside the US-led framework. These strategies not only secure more affordable supplies for China, but also enhance global negotiating power, potentially catalyzing extensive shifts in both energy markets and diplomatic relations. Expansion of electric vehicles and renewable energy. China is rapidly accelerating its adoption of electric vehicles, a trend that has immediate repercussions for oil demand. As an increasing number of Chinese consumers choose EVs, and the government pushes for greater electrification in both transportation and industrial sectors, future oil consumption may decrease. Furthermore, the growing use of cleaner energy alternatives such as LNG continues to reduce reliance on traditional petroleum fuels. China and the BRICS bloc. China's strategic financial shift towards BRICS nations, which are pivotal global oil suppliers, has notably altered global energy pathways, especially in the context of Western sanctions driven by geopolitical conflicts. China and Saudi Arabia. The energy relationship that half of its energy be renewable by 2030, project that could reach 7.8 gigawatt-hours and technology initiatives. Saudi Arabia continues to be a cornerstone of China's oil imports. In 2023, bilateral trade hit approximately $107.23 billion, largely driven by oil exports. In addition to conventional hydrocarbons, both nations are investing in clean energy. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, which targets that half of its energy be renewable by 2030, sees strong participation from Chinese companies. For example, in August 2024, China Energy Engineering inked a $972 million deal to build a 2-gigawatt solar farm in Saudi Arabia, collaborating with local players such as the Public Investment Fund and ACWA Power. In July 2024, Chinese company SunGrow Power Supply partnered with Saudi firm Al Jihaz, holding on an energy storage project that could reach 7.8 gigawatt-hours, thereby enhancing grid stability in the kingdom. Financial ties are also growing. In November 2024, China selected Saudi Arabia for its first sovereign bond issuance denominated in dollars in 3 years, with plans to issue up to $2 billion in Riyadh. This initiative underscores China's support for Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and reinforces their deepening economic partnership. China-Russia energy relations. Following Russia's discounted rates to China, by 2023, pipeline, which would redirect flows originally in economy, including energy, defense, and finance. In response, Russia embarked on its turn to the east strategy, seeking closer ties with Asia-Pacific countries, notably China. This pivot accelerated after the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which led to even harsher Western measures designed to isolate Russia. As a result, Russia started offering oil at discounted rates to China, By 2023, bilateral trade between the two had exceeded $240 billion, with energy exports forming a significant portion. In 2024, China finalized the Power of Siberia pipeline project, enhancing its access to Russian natural gas. This move is part of China's larger strategy to diversify its energy sources and secure long-term supply. Russia has also discussed boosting gas deliveries to China through the proposed Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which would redirect flows originally earmarked for Europe. China-Iran energy relations. China's oil funding for Tehran's missile programs and related activities. Despite U.S. efforts to curb Iranian oil exports, China persists in purchasing Iranian crude, often at significantly reduced prices. These deals not only ensure a steady supply of affordable energy for China, but also provide critical revenue for Iran. In October 2024, the United States introduced additional sanctions targeting Iran's oil and petrochemical industries, aiming to cut off funding for Tehran's missile programs and related activities. Let's take a quick pause. If you've enjoyed the video so far, could we ask a small favor? Hitting the like button helps us reach a broader audience, and sharing your thoughts or feedback in the comments makes an even bigger impact. Thank you for watching. Now, let's dive back in. China-UAE trade. Energy commerce by 2023, total trade between the sea strengthened its ties with the Abu Dhabi national and environmental initiatives. China's
The Chinese military is stepping up its campaign against Taiwan. Warships and fighter jets flooded the region, pressing dangerously close to Taiwan's borders. But Beijing's ambitions go far beyond the surface. Underneath the waves, a deep-sea outpost and nuclear submarines are shifting the balance of power. Take a look at this report.
Economic and military war. Really.
China's naval and air forces are ramping up operations around Taiwan. Within 48 hours, 62 Chinese military aircraft and 17 warships swamped the waters on the island. Fighter jets conducted aggressive maneuvers, sending a clear warning to Taipei and its allies.
They're using the same move Putin did. Everything a military drill until it's not.
Chinese warships prowled nearby, signaling Beijing's intent to dominate the contested region. China's aggression is not limited to Taiwan. An Australian military aircraft found itself in Beijing's crosshairs over the South China Sea. The Chinese fighter jet fired flares in its path, another sign of Beijing's growing hostility towards regional and Western forces operating in the area.
An Australian P-8 that was flying in international airspace in the South China Sea was challenged by a couple of J-16 Chinese Air Force planes, their fourth generation fast jets. There were a number of interactions between them and the P-8, but one of those interactions involved the release of flares at a very close distance to the P-8, such that the flares passed within about 30 metres of the P-8.
While tensions flare above, China is executing a calculated expansion beneath the sea. A deep-sea research station, one of the most advanced of its kind, is in development. Anchored at a depth of 6,560 feet, this underwater facility is set to be operational by 2030. Housing 6 scientists for extended missions, it is more than just a research hub. It cements Beijing's control over one of the world's most resource-rich waters. The South China Sea holds 70 billion tons of methane hydrates, a resource equal to half of China's proven oil and gas reserves. With this deep-sea base, Beijing is securing a critical energy supply and strengthening its geopolitical leverage. Beyond research, China's undersea ambitions include a formidable military presence. The Type 094 nuclear-based missile submarine lurks beneath the waves, unseen yet ever ready. Capable of launching JL-2 and nuclear-tipped JL-3 missiles, this submarine poses a direct threat to U.S. territories. The Pentagon calls it China's first credible sea-based nuclear deterrent, a clear indication of Beijing's expanding nuclear reach. China is not making moves. It is remaking the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, from the skies above Taiwan to the depths of the South China Sea. Bureau Report, Beyond World is One.
For all the latest news, download the WION app.
China is preparing for war. It is building an entire city for this purpose, about 30 kilometers southwest of Beijing. A new military complex is coming up.
When wondering about command centers, the Pentagon always clouds the mind as one of the most sophisticated military structures ever built. But what if we told you another command center is being built, and it is 10 times bigger and better than even the Pentagon itself? That's right. China is working on its own version of a command center, and from what we know so far, it exceeds all expectations and dethrones every military command center in the world. Today's episode will uncover how China is constructing the world's largest military center, and it's 10 times bigger than the Pentagon. China is once again making headlines with its ambitious construction of the world's largest military command center, a strategy that shows the nation's growing military and strategic aspirations. Named Beijing Military City, this huge facility is designed to power up China's national defense during these rising global tensions and the looming threat of nuclear conflicts. The project, absolutely massive in scale, shows the country's commitment to securing its leadership and modernizing its military for a new era of military. But what does this development truly mean for China and the rest of the world? Let's delve a bit deeper into the details. Situated about 30 kilometers southwest of Beijing, this huge command center spans an impressive 1,500 acres, making it at least 10 times the size of the Pentagon, the United States' renowned military headquarters. The sheer size and scale of Beijing Military City leave no room for doubt about its strategic importance. Recent satellite imagery reveals intense excavation and construction activity, with over 100 cranes working tirelessly to bring this facility to life. The speed and precision of this project tells you how serious China is to obtain the rank of the most powerful military in the world by the end of the decade. This multi-billion-dollar initiative is not just a display of architectural ambition, it has a far more important purpose. Designed to protect top Chinese leaders, including President Xi Jinping, during potential conflicts, particularly those involving nuclear threats, the facility boasts reinforced underground structures and deep pits. Analysts tell us these features are intended to function as fortified bunkers, capable of withstanding even the most devastating attacks. Such an infrastructure shows China's approach to ensuring the safety and continuity of its leadership under any circumstances, especially at times when geopolitical tensions are so high. Construction began in mid-2024, strategically aligning with preparations for the centenary of the People's Liberation Army, PLA. This timing is no coincidence. The project shows China's intent to modernize its military capabilities and achieve a level of preparedness that rivals, if not surpasses, other global powers, especially that of the US. According to Dennis Wilder, a former head of the CIA's China desk, the command center's development shows Beijing's ambition to build not only a world-class conventional military force, but also an advanced nuclear warfighting capability. Could this be the clearest indication yet of China's readiness to challenge established military norms? The rapid progress of this project is basically China's urgency to fight incoming threats, particularly from the United States. Analysts have also told us that this command center's completion will significantly enhance China's strategic positioning as the country continues to expand its nuclear arsenal. By 2035, China's nuclear capabilities are projected to match and surpass those of the US, something that is much needed for the nation. This nuclear arsenal expansion has been improving steadily and will see the completion relatively soon. Pictures and analysis over the internet suggest that this facility is far more than a simple command center. Evidence points to an extensive underground infrastructure with potential passageways connecting various facilities within the complex. The image analysis indicates the construction of several possible underground facilities connected by potential underground passageways, though additional data is needed for a fuller assessment, notes Rennie Babiars from All Source Analysis. These integrations of underground networks ensures not only protection, but also easier operational efficiency, no matter how challenging the scenario is. Despite financial challenges in China's real estate sector, the construction of Beijing Military City continues without delay. This shows how vital the project is to China's strategic goals. Unlike commercial projects, this military facility is being built in complete secrecy, with no public announcements or promotions from the official Chinese military, highlighting its critical role in national defense. But then again, the nation is known for its secrecy over such matters. There are some questions from the enthusiasts whether the terrain is suitable for such large underground structures. But the project's massive scale and fast pace suggest it's entirely feasible. One intelligence official even called it a doomsday bunker for China's military. While dramatic, this description captures the essence of the facility, a fortress designed to ensure China's strength and resilience in any conflict. The timing of the project also plays a huge role in this insane development. Analysts believe it aligns with President Xi Jinping's ambitions for Taiwan. As tensions rise in the region, experts suggest a potential conflict over Taiwan could happen as early as 2027. Completing Beijing Military City by then could be a key part of China's strategy. How this development will shift power dynamics in the Asia-Pacific region remains an open question. From all we know, the Beijing Military City seems to serve a dual purpose, presenting a strong defensive stance while maintaining a narrative of peace. But then again, this has always been China's main guideline. Build a strong military, but remain peaceful until and unless provoked by any other party. Keep in mind that this comes at a time where the geopolitical tensions are increasingly high and the US cannot stop talking about China. The global community watches with a mix of applause and curiosity as the project goes through its stages. For China, Beijing Military City is more than a military base. It's basically a statement of its readiness to defend its interests and sovereignty. Once complete, it will mark a major milestone in China's military evolution, reinforcing its role as a leading global power. Not to mention, the nation will boast the largest military infrastructure in the world. Beyond its military importance, the project also gives a glimpse into China's technological and engineering expertise. Building such a massive, complex facility so quickly shows the nation's ability to lead in infrastructure and innovation. And as the world's largest military command center nears completion, it will undoubtedly give a huge boost to China's overall military power. The nation has been working steadily to improve various sectors of military, but having a command center as huge and technologically superior than all else gives another boost to the military growth that China is trying hard to achieve. But all in all, Beijing Military City is a bold and a much-needed move for China. As the command center moves forward, it will bring China closer to its goal of a world-class military. You would think the nation would take a slower approach to military developments after all the impressive developments in the past few years, but China doesn't plan to stop just yet. Instead, the nation is ready to defy all odds and expectations and meet core deadlines before anyone could ever expect. With much about how China is constructing the world's largest military center, and it's 10 times bigger than the Pentagon covered, it is time to wrap this one up. If you have any topics in mind, comment below and we will cover them for you. As always, subscribe to Never
Aerial footage monitors the release of Israeli prisoners by Palestinian resistance groups in Khan Yunis, south of Gaza Strip, on Saturday, February 15, 2025. Today, 3 Israeli prisoners were exchanged for 369 Palestinian prisoners in the 6th prisoner exchange deal, which took place in a tough manner, as the resistance fighters arrived at the handover stage during the ceremony, waving several flags of Arab countries such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Jordan, Algeria, Yemen, Iraq, and Palestinian flag. The footage went viral online, revealing some of the troops from the Al-Qassam brigades and the Al-Quds brigades, appearing for the first time wearing the uniforms of the Israeli Special Forces and all their military equipment, which were taken during the operation on October 7, 2023. Interestingly, some members of the resistance troops showed off the Israeli weapons they had seized, in addition to the Taver and MP5 rifles, used by the elite Israeli units. Next, the resistance troops released 3 Israeli prisoners following a ceasefire, and they came out to the stage to complete the handover procedures. Alexander Trufanov, an Israeli-Russian prisoner, and 2 other prisoners were even handed over in good health to Red Cross employees in Khan Yunis, where prisoner Sagi Dekel called on his government to do everything possible to ensure the continuation of the exchange deal, Al-Mayadeen reported. Before the event, the resistance released footage showing Alexander Turbanov, who was scheduled to be released by the Al-Quds brigades, spending time on the coast of Gaza Strip while in captivity. Turbanov happily fished on the coast of Gaza, and was even given the opportunity to write letters to his family. Meanwhile, buses carrying Palestinian hostages released from Israeli prisons have arrived in Khan Yunis. At least 4 freed Palestinians were transferred to the hospital in a difficult health condition, Palestinian Red Crescent reported. Nader Jamal Hussein, a Palestinian from Jabalia in the exchange deal, was immediately taken to the hospital to be put on an infuse. He was kidnapped during the war on Gaza, and now shows physical and mental signs, clearly visible on their bodies due to the violations inside the prison. Also, another Palestinian prisoner cries with joy after being released from prison, that Gaza is happy with the return of her children, and hopes to meet the other children.
The 6th batch of the Israeli prisoners of war have been released today from Gaza, with 2 of the Palestinian resistance movements releasing them, the armed wing of the PIJ, the Al-Quds brigades, and the armed wing of Hamas, Al-Qassam brigades. In return, Israel released 369 Palestinian prisoners, many of them who had life sentences and many from Gaza as well. Some of them were describing the horrors in the Israeli prisons. One of them said that even hell is too small to describe what we faced. One of them lost a limb. He went in with 2 legs, got out with 1 leg. To that level, the level of torture of the Palestinian prisoners is beyond imagination. These people have been suffering with so much abuse in the Israeli prisons, and not enough is highlighted when it comes to the suffering of the Palestinian prisoners. However, this was something that pushed the Palestinian resistance to carry out these operations against the genocide entity, to release their prisoners suffering so much in the Israeli prisons. One of those who was released today was Alexander Trufanov. I'm going to get to the details of Alexander Trufanov and the Russian feedback that made Israel furious after his release. But firstly, we're going to start off with some of the messages that the Palestinian resistance intended to send Israel during this release. So firstly, they had this stage, and on that stage, they had multiple images. One logo or image had the late Yahya Sinwar, who was sitting on the sofa looking at Jerusalem, saying that we won't migrate to anywhere but to Jerusalem, signaling that they are continuing up until the liberation of Jerusalem. Then we've had an image behind the Palestinian resistance fighters and the representatives coming from the Red Cross with some Arab countries' flags behind them. However, what was very notable was the fact that Hamas positioned the Egyptian flag exactly behind the Palestinian fighter or senior figure signing the release agreement with the representative of the Red Cross. This was deliberate, and this was intending to send a message to Israel and show solidarity with the positions that are coming from Egypt. Other countries' flags too were there, such as Algeria, Jordan, and Lebanon too. However, the fact that they positioned that Egyptian flag there signals very much the importance of Egypt when it comes to this. And that Egyptian flag was carried by a fighter going to liberate Al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, again signaling that we're having shifts when it comes to the countries involved, and they are envisioning this as the future from a Palestinian side. Another message that they sent was, well, the gear, much of the gear that the Palestinian fighters were wearing was taken. IDF soldiers on the 7th of October. Israeli prisoners who were released, they had multiple speeches. One of them was, of course, Alexander Trufanov, who said that we call on the leaders of both sides to continue down this path to end the suffering and continue and releasing all of the Israeli prisoners and the Palestinian prisoners as well. And after that, of course, they were handed to the Red Cross. In addition, they've had images of the locations that the Palestinian resistance attacked on the 7th of October, saying that we passed swiftly, indicating that it was an easy task for them. And again, showing Israel that this is what we've done, and only through negotiations you reach this stage, not through genocide, and Israel did not rescue these people through its barbarism inside of Gaza. And Israel, on the other hand, tried to send messages to the Palestinian side and the world, but their messages were miserable. They were putting the Palestinian prisoners who they were abusing with this shirt that had the Star of David, saying that we will not forgive and we will not forget. And Palestinian prisoners who were released were seen taking them off upon their arrival and burning them in the streets. And Israeli Channel 12 had a comment on this. They said that dressing the prisoners like this is bankruptcy and a sign of clear weakness. You know, we have to resort to these pathetic measures to get the message across. They're doing this to cover up, of course, the loss, the humiliation, and the failure when it comes to Gaza. Then today also marked the deadline. Donald Trump, he gave a deadline. He said Saturday, 12 o'clock, if all of the Israeli prisoners in Gaza are not released, there's going to be hell to pay. But all of a sudden, he made a declaration that yesterday he said he was going to make an important statement. Today he made that important statement. What was that important statement coming from Donald Trump? Israel must decide what to do regarding the ultimatum to release all prisoners, and we will support them with what they decide. That's the hell of Donald Trump. Passing the deflated ball into the genocide state's court. And what did Benjamin Netanyahu do? Benjamin Netanyahu had an urgent security and political cabinet meeting to, of course, start to discuss the response and what are we going to do. But as the ultimatum expired, Netanyahu issued a message of appreciation to Donald Trump, but he said, no, we're not going to violate the ceasefire. So much for the loudmouth Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu and their promises for hell. That's the hell that they were talking about, again, proving that all of these statements were nothing but empty threats, scare balloons, trying to get more out of the Palestinian resistance, who knows them very, very well. And that's why, of course, they continue. It's again proving the statements that came from Hamas earlier today that they weren't really bothered that much. They said we received guarantees, and these guarantees will prevent Israel from escalating. And after Benjamin Netanyahu's statement, we clearly saw what that means. Empty threats. Moving on to Lebanon. In Lebanon, we had a dangerous escalation. Today, for the first time since the ceasefire in Lebanon, Israel carried out a targeted assassination. A targeted assassination, reportedly killing a man called Abbas Ahmad Mahmoud. And Israel Katz, the Israel defense minister, claimed that the man was one of the leaders of the air and missile forces of Hezbollah. So their drones, their missiles, and what have you. There has been no verification of his position, but this was published. Why is Israel doing this now when in 3 days the deadline is supposed to expire for their presence in Lebanon? Israel is trying to create more tensions and escalate before the funeral of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and Sayyid Hashim Safiuddin, who were assassinated during this war. Their funeral is going to take place on the 23rd. It's going to be a very large event in Beirut with visitors from 73 countries, expected to have hundreds of thousands of people. They want to keep them anxious, saying that, oh, hold on, they might attack us. And they want to potentially put people off going to that funeral, because there is no real intention apart from that. And from Hezbollah's side, there wasn't a confirmation yet. Is Hezbollah still delaying this? That it could be the timing of their publishing or denial, it could have specific reasons, but we haven't had a lot of elaboration. And it does not look like this will be breaking the ceasefire or escalating things to a level where it will completely reach an actual war again with Lebanon. However, things are very fragile, and the Lebanese are furious over the fact that, Israel has so much when it comes to influence now in Lebanon to a level where the Lebanese authorities are preventing some of the Iranian planes from coming in. And these indicate that the United States and Israel are still trying to cause this internal war, this internal civil war inside of Lebanon. But to this moment, it didn't reach a stage where things are looking to completely explode. Which leads us to the following thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is the Russian response regarding the release of Alexander Trufanov that made Israel furious this time. What did they do? Russia thanks Hamas, welcomes the release of the captive citizens inside of Gaza. What did Russia say? They said, "We thank the Hamas administration for its decision." That was from the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov. He said this to reporters in Moscow. And also Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokesperson, she expressed gratitude for the Palestinian side as well as Qatar and Egypt for the securing of the release of Trufanov. But no one mentioned Israel. Russia's thanking Hamas, they're thanking the Palestinian side, they're thanking Egypt and thanking Qatar, and no mention to Israel. This made people furious in Israel. Why are they thanking them? But this is indicating how close the Russian side is both to the Palestinian side and the Palestinian resistance too. Trufanov was held by the PIJ, by Sarai al-Quds, the armed wing of the PIJ, and Hamas, of course, in complete coordination, because Hamas and the PIJ, they're strategic allies inside of Gaza. They work in a lot of harmony, both of these groups, in terms of coordination, fighting Israel, and the resistance in Gaza that consists of approximately 13 armed groups. They also work together in harmony completely, and this shows Russia's position and Russia's intentions when it comes to Gaza and Palestine as well.
One second.
Lebanon has a divided people. There's no doubt about it. A segment of the population is pro-Israel. The party led by Samir Ja'ja, the Lebanese forces, they are the same people that carried out the Sabra and Shatila massacre, among other massacres in 1982. In that particular massacre, they slaughtered 3,500 Palestinian and Shia men, women, and children. They went into the refugee camp and just slaughtered in 36 hours through thousands of people. They did it under the supervision of their Israeli allies, and they are a force in Lebanon. Then you have the American embassy, the European embassies, you have USAID, and all these other organizations that are funding NGOs. And Lebanon has probably more money coming into it from these NGOs than any other country in the world compared to its population. So you have a lot of corruption as a result of that money. You have lots of people who are getting money from Western sources. So you have the embassies, you have the NGOs, you have these people like Ja'ja who are willing to slaughter Lebanese civilians at the behest of the Americans or the Europeans or the Israelis. But the majority of the Lebanese, they are sympathetic to the resistance. They are hostile towards the Israeli regime. The last election, Hezbollah and its partners won. They won the majority. And that was at a time when I think Lebanese society was more divided than today. Today, it's more united because of the war and the fact that different communities saw Hezbollah as protecting not just Lebanon, but the Palestinians and in Gaza, whereas the rest of the Arab world was looking away, the Turks were looking away, everyone was looking away, and Hezbollah was sacrificing its own youth for the sake of the children and the women and the civilians and the people of Gaza. Lebanon is somewhat divided, but there's a lot of pressure coming in from the West and the United States. And therefore, you're not going to have a government that is going to necessarily reflect the views of the Lebanese public. I know some officials in the Lebanese government who I've spoken to are not affiliated to the resistance, and they say that it's difficult for us to navigate. I mean, in the past, when I used to speak to them, they would openly say it's very difficult for us to navigate because of the West. So I think we're going to see difficulty ahead, but ultimately the Lebanese government is going to have to make sure that the population is not marginalized. They do need the resistance, the supporters of the resistance, in order for the country to remain stable. And the armed forces obviously are not going to be able to protect Lebanon. They don't have that capability. The Americans will never allow them to have that capability. And I think it's clear that Lebanon also, civil society at large, in order for it to be stable, in order for it to be able to function, they're going to have to allow the communities affiliated with the resistance to move freely. So right now there's talk about blocking flights, direct flights to Iran. The Americans and the Israelis want to besiege the Shia community and those who are supportive of the resistance and the broader resistance community. That in the long run is only going to weaken the government and it's going to weaken Lebanon. So after a period of time, I think there's going to be, things are going to calm down, and I think the government is going to have to acknowledge the reality on the ground. You see already that initially, when they were going to form the new government, they tried to exclude ministers affiliated to the resistance under Western pressure, but they had to accept them ultimately. 5 ministers are from the resistance, the Minister of Economy, which again, they didn't want to give to the resistance or allies of the resistance. They did so because they had to acknowledge the reality of Lebanon. And I think that as time goes by, the state is going to have to continue moving in that direction. In the south, the Israelis do not plan to leave those border areas, that some of those key areas that they have occupied. And I think it's going to become clear that the armed forces of Lebanon will not be able to do anything about it. Again, that reinforces the logic that Lebanon needs resistance. Otherwise, it will face the same fate as the West Bank, as other areas which were Syria, the Golan Heights, and even deeper inside Syria today. If there isn't a force for the Israeli regime to be fearful of, this is an expansionist regime. So I think as time goes by, the logic that Lebanon needs the resistance and that the government has to meet their key demands and the demands of the majority of the Lebanese people, I think that is going to bear enough weight to make sure that the government doesn't do anything that will destabilize the country.
In your opinion, what are the main points on the part of Israelis to stay in the southern Lebanon?
Well, part of it is military. They want strategic locations for themselves. Part of it is that the Israeli regime is an expansionist regime, and they'll take what they can from whoever they can. And they don't know boundaries. And Greater Israel includes Jordan, it includes large parts of Syria, it includes parts of Egypt, and it includes almost all of Lebanon. So that logic exists. But also, I think it is partially an attempt by the Israeli regime to humiliate neighbors, and to gain the support of ordinary Israelis, because the Israeli people, these colonizers, we have to acknowledge that overwhelmingly they're genocidal. Overwhelmingly, they're racist. And it's not as if when we say like the extremists in the Israeli regime, they have these certain characteristics, and that means that the others are not extremists and that they're ordinary people. No, the overwhelming majority of Israelis are racist. They're Zionists. They're supremacists, and they support the genocide. So in order to gain support from the public, the more aggressive and the more brutal and ruthless the regime is, the more they kill, the more popular they become and the more legitimacy they gain. So if they are able to have a foothold in Lebanon, in Syria, in anywhere else, they show themselves to be strong among their own population. But also, again, it's by nature an expansionist regime. But as I said, it's also, there are certain areas that they want so that they can have a foothold to be able to confront the resistance. But again, here, as in Syria, this doesn't work well for the regime. In Syria, the Israelis have taken a lot of land, but what they've done is that they've delegitimized the Syrian regime, the Al-Qaeda regime, the Jolani regime, that is completely indifferent to what they're doing. It shows that Erdogan is not going to do anything for the Syrian people. He's willing to destroy Syria, but he's not willing to protect Syria in the face of Israeli aggression. This only weakens the people that they should be having on their side. In the case of Lebanon, it's the same thing. They're strengthening the logic that Lebanon without the resistance will not be able to defend itself. So it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they benefit in certain ways. They benefit among their own public, but they create greater hatred and hostility, and they strengthen the logic of the resistance front.
What was your take on the meeting between Donald Trump and the King of Jordan, Abdullah? Is Donald Trump going to achieve what he wants to achieve?
Well, if you mean that is he going to be able to empty Gaza? No, obviously not. The Israeli regime tried for 16 months and it did not end well for them. In fact, as I've said on multiple occasions, the greatest defeat for the Zionist regime is the fact that the world despises it. Even in the United States, you see a big segment of American society has turned against the regime, despite all the censorship, despite the pressure, despite mainstream media, despite the money, the infinite amount of money that the pro-Israeli lobby has. You see, even in the United States, that the Palestinian cause has made huge progress among the youth in particular. And the rest of the world, of course, is against the regime. So I think that was a devastating blow, an irreversible blow, what has happened over the past 16 months. The Americans and the Europeans have destroyed their own soft power, as they call it, because they supported this Holocaust. And I don't believe that in future it's going to make any difference. If the United States pushes for a new round of assault and attacks and war, and an extension of the genocide and Holocaust, then the United States is going to pay for it. It's going to be a heavy price. You know, brand America is dead, and it has a huge impact on how the United States works in the world that we live in, even when it comes to economy. It's not just that a lot of people no longer go to McDonald's, or they don't buy American goods. It's even governments, even officials in governments who have a negative view of the West. They, in their dealings, in their major dealings, they would prefer to many of them to work with non-Western companies in future because of the bad feeling that exists towards the West. It's not just, let's say, me no longer wanting to buy a iPhone or an American-made laptop or anything like that. It goes far beyond that. So brand America is broken further as a result of this sort of behavior. But I think even further than that, what the United States is doing and what Trump is doing inadvertently is that he is destabilizing the American camp in West Asia and North Africa. All of these regimes that have been silent over the past year and a half, they've angered their populations. And Turkey continuing to do trade with Netanyahu, helping him run his economy with cheap Baku oil and also oil stolen from Syria. Egypt helping ships to bring in goods that they couldn't get through the Red Sea because of Ansarullah. Jordan doing all of these governments, they're already seen by many people as compromised. Now, if they take the ultimate step and allow the displacement of the Palestinian people, then I think that could bring down these governments. And that would bring an end to the US presence in West Asia. I have very little doubt that if one of these regimes really becomes unstable, everything will begin to unravel. And that would be the end of the US presence here, or to a large degree. And that would be catastrophic for the Israeli regime. So what Trump is doing by humiliating these regimes, and in particular by humiliating the Jordanian king, is that he's weakening his own position.
On one part, if we assume that Donald Trump would be successful in forcing them to accept that, but are these countries, when you look at the reality in these countries, are they really able to accept millions of people in their society? And what would be the reaction from their societies, in your opinion?
Well, hypothetically, I mean, they can do it. Egypt has a population of 120 million. 1 million is not going to make a difference. Jordan is smaller, but again, 1 million. I mean, it makes a difference, but it's not going to be some tipping point. But it goes far beyond that. The point is that these countries will not accept this. After this, first of all, they're not going to leave. That's issue number one. They've gone through. I don't think that the world will tolerate another 15 months of genocide. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that if they start again, it's going to be much worse for Israel, because the world is sick and tired of this. And the West has changed too. The mood has changed. Personally, I don't even believe that Trump is serious. I've said this before. I don't think he's serious about this. I may be wrong. I don't know what goes on in his mind. I don't know if he's playing the madman, or if he is the madman, or if he's somewhere in between. I can't say for certain. But I personally think that Trump wants the second phase of his ceasefire to go forward. And I think that he's talking, and I may be wrong, and I think that he's talking about ethnic cleansing in order to strengthen Netanyahu's position at home so that his government doesn't fall apart, so that Netanyahu stays in power and the second phase moves forward. That's how I see it. I may be wrong, but that's from the very beginning that when this discussion began, I thought that's what it was about. But it doesn't diminish the ugliness of what Trump said. It's disgusting what he says, and it's everyone should be outraged. I'm just saying that in my personal opinion, I think he's not serious about this. What he wants to do is he wants to preserve the ceasefire because it's in his interest. It's in the interest of the United States. And again, if this war starts again, I think it's going to be much worse for the West and for the Israeli regime this time around, because the world is just sick and tired of their bloodthirsty behavior over the past 15, 16 months. Everyone, the world has been watching in horror. I just simply don't think it's doable for the United States, and it's not good for Trump because he promised to end the wars. He promised, about American first, and if weeks into his presidency he moves in the opposite direction, I don't think it will bode well for him. And he has lots of trouble at home. He has a lot. We know what's going on right now inside the United States, and then there's the issue of Russia and Europe and China, and of course Iran is much more powerful than, as I've said perhaps before. When the Americans were at the height of their power, Soviet Union had collapsed. The Americans took Afghanistan and they took Iran. They surrounded Iran. And then someone in the United States said, real men go to Tehran. But no one went to Tehran. Why? Because even back then, when Iran was isolated and the United States was much more powerful, they knew that it wasn't a war they could win. It would be destructive for Iran, but it wasn't something they could win. Today, it's much different. The United States is much weaker. The Iranians are much stronger. Iran has a huge underground defense capability, which we all know about. So I don't think Trump wants war, whether with Iran, whether in Gaza, or anywhere else, because it will not look good for him and it will be destructive for him. So I think that this is not serious talk. I think it is about giving Netanyahu a lifeline and to serve his own interests for the short term. But it would, of course, be a burden for Jordan and Egypt. But it's not. When the United States says we will no longer give aid, $1 billion or $1.5 billion to Jordan and $1.5 billion to Egypt is not a lot of money. Trump wants Netanyahu, he wants Saudi Arabia to invest $1 trillion in the United States. Now they don't have $1 trillion. That's nonsense too. But the point is that this is not a large sum of money, and it can easily be replaced. It's not something that, if it's withheld, is going to bring down the Jordanian economy. That money is basically corruption money. That money goes to the elites in Jordan and then to the elites in Egypt to keep them happy and to make sure they pursue policies that the United States wants them to pursue.
Many people are arguing that Donald Trump would behave the same way that he was behaving toward the conflict in Ukraine, because if you remember, he was telling us and everybody that Russia is weak, they're losing, they're doing this, doing that, and all of those rhetorics were against Russia. Right now, he started negotiating, talking directly with the Russian president. Many people are arguing that that would be the case in the Middle East, the way that Donald Trump, as you've mentioned, talking about sending people, displacing people, Gazans from their land. It's not that serious in the mind of Trump because he knows the reality is not the way that he's picturing for us. And let's assume that he wants the second phase of this ceasefire. What would be the next step on the part of the United States if we assume that he knows the just removing people or displacing people from Gaza is not practical?
Well, first of all, let me add something here about the ceasefire. Trump basically said that the third round or the third phase of the ceasefire is not acceptable to him. This is very important because the ceasefire came about largely due to the negotiations that his representative was involved in. And the United States is basically the force behind the ceasefire. that they're a guarantor for the ceasefire, both in Lebanon and in Gaza. In Lebanon, the Israeli regime is violating the ceasefire. They kill people, they destroy property, and they continue to illegally occupy small points alongside the border between Palestine and Lebanon. In Gaza, they continue to kill people. And since the ceasefire, 80-some people have been murdered by the Israelis. But most important, so the United States is not playing the role that it's supposed to be. So it's not seen as enforcing its obligations. It's not seen as abiding by its obligations. But most importantly, if the United States rejects the third phase of the ceasefire, that means that it cannot be trusted at the negotiating table because it's something that the United States helped bring about. So what does that mean for Iran? What does that mean for Russia? If the United States wants to negotiate with Iran, then how can Iran trust the United States? We saw that Trump tore up the nuclear deal. Of course, Obama never committed himself to US obligations in the deal. But Trump tore up the deal. And that's why Iranians can't trust Trump. So now let's say Trump comes forward again and says, I want to negotiate with Iran. The Iranians are looking at the Gaza deal, the deal that the Americans helped negotiate. Now the Americans are saying, no, phase 3 is out of the question. That means we cannot negotiate with the United States. They won't abide by their own commitments. It's like the Minsk Accords. It's like, as I said, the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. So it's not as if this is a smart move by Trump. This madman behavior, assuming that he's not mad or that he's not halfway mad, this madman behavior does not help the United States in the long run. It hurts the United States in the long run. It's sort of like Erdogan. Erdogan is a person who everyone says he deals with all sides. He's constantly shifting and changing. They used to say that this is smart. But the thing is that when you're unprincipled, when no one can trust you, even if you sign an agreement, it doesn't mean anything anymore. No one trusts Erdogan. And so no one really is willing to go very far with the Turkish government. This is the same problem that the United States has. If you cannot trust the United States, how can you do any serious negotiations with the United States? So this is a big problem. Now, going to your question, it is possible that the United States seriously wants to shift policy. The smart thing for the United States to do would be to improve its relations with Iran and for the whole axis of resistance. The moves that are being made towards Russia seem to indicate that there is some will to do that with Russia. I don't know how far they can get or how far they're willing to go. That remains to be seen because there's going to be a lot of resistance in the Western camp, and the Russians have demands. They've fought for 3 years, and they're not going to give anything up for the sake of Trump. And the Russians are not going to trust Trump because, as I said, he's unreliable. But also, even if he is sincere in changing the relationship with Russia, who knows who's going to be the next president of the United States? So the Russians are no longer going to put all their eggs in the American basket. The United States is not a country that you can trust. You can't trust Trump, and you cannot trust the United States in the broader sense. So let's assume that the United States, if it was smart, it would move in a better direction. It would try to create some sort of rapprochement with the people of West Asia and North Africa. There's a difference between Russia and this region, and that is the Israeli regime. So logically, the United States should do that. But the Israeli lobby, the Zionist lobby in the United States, is not a lobby that's based on rationality, morality, or reason, or US interests. It is Israeli first. So it's willing to sacrifice American interests for the Israeli regime. And that's why they've been doing things, the United States has been doing things for decades that's detrimental to their interests. Ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States in this region has been damaging itself. And even Trump, when he posted that clip by where Professor Sachs spoke, I think at Oxford, Trump seems to recognize that all the wars in our region, Iraq, Libya, and so on. The dirty war in Syria. The dirty war in Syria, it's very interesting that some people support Al-Qaeda in Syria, but they call themselves pro-Palestinian. But they don't see that the inconsistency here, that this is US policy to support Al-Qaeda in Syria. And we saw recently Tulsi Gabbard say it at, in the Senate, that this is the CIA. And even the alleged chemical attacks, these were all, it's clear that these were false flag operations. So it's very interesting. I mean, just as a footnote, that some people who are against the United States in Gaza, they're with the United States in Syria, whereas US policy in Syria is to help the Israelis destroy resistance in West Asia and, of course, ultimately get rid of the Palestinian people. But in any case, the Israeli regime, its existence is detrimental to US interests. It is a burden on the United States because it is forcing the United States to pursue policies that are not in its interests, but rather in the interests of the Israeli regime. They've wasted trillions of dollars in this region and created universal hatred towards themselves with no benefit, except for Netanyahu and the likes of these genocidal people. But if the United States was indeed pursuing its own interests in the region, it would be moving in the opposite direction, trying to cultivate new friends in the region and to diminish anger and animosity towards the United States across the board.
You mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, and we know that she met with Bashar al-Assad, and she knows somehow the reality of the Middle East. Do you think that would be a substantial help for Donald Trump to understand better the Middle East and maybe make right decisions?
That's difficult to say. I think that she is deeply influenced by the Zionist lobby. If she did not have substantial support, she would not have been confirmed. I think that she will be different in the sense that, as you've rightly pointed out, she does understand that the United States has been supporting Al-Qaeda in this region for decades. The United States has been supporting ISIS in this region for decades, and we saw it bear fruit in Syria. We know she's basically been saying in a subtle way that the chemical attacks were carried out they were false flag operations. All the things that we've been saying from the very beginning, is coming out. The truth is coming out. One of the good things about this change in the United States is that things are coming. The things that we were saying and we are being called conspiracy theorists in the past, it's all coming out. It's what we said from day one is all true. Even though we knew it was true, but now many people are acknowledging it. Trump coming to power has had huge benefits. One is that the hypocrisies inside the United States are being revealed. The nature of USAID and the dirty wars, and a lot of good comes from this. It's not that he's any good, but it is beneficial towards the world. I don't think that USAID, that the dirty work that they do, is going to go away. I think the State Department will restart the same sort of corrupt practices, but in a different way. But in any case, I think that this period has been very good to create greater awareness across the board about the nature of the United States, the U.S. government, Western European regimes, and the damage and destruction and the horrors that they've created for the rest of the world, and how their sense of superiority and their sense of exceptionalism is completely unfounded, and it's exactly the opposite in reality. But I don't think Tulsi Gabbard I don't think she has that much power. The real power that she holds is that she will have direct access to Trump, and I think Trump is as George Bush would say, he is the decider. And that's what makes her important. But I think she is deeply influenced by the Israeli regime. And therefore, I wouldn't put too much faith in anything that comes from Washington. And I don't think anyone in this region will.
Washington Post reported that Israel wanted to attack Iran, and the Biden administration tried to go against them, considering that sort of decision. How do you see the situation right now? Do you think that Donald Trump, with all that we've been witnessing so far, are they gonna let Israel to talk about these things, not just going after them, just talking about these things? Because the way that Donald Trump recently was talking about that, he's not considering any sort of military actions or operations against Iran. He wants some sort of negotiations. How about Israel, the way that Israel sees this situation?
First of all, the Washington Post is completely unreliable. It is the newspaper where the CIA puts all its misinformation and disinformation. So you don't know if it's really true, whether there's an agenda, whether it's being put out there to put pressure on Iran or to change some policy. We don't know. It's clear that American media, Western media is completely corrupted. It doesn't matter if it's left, none of them are left, I mean, in the traditional sense. But whether they're liberal or whether they're right, it doesn't matter if it's The Guardian or if it's the New York Times or Breitbart or the Times of London or anything. It doesn't matter. They're all a part of the political establishment. They're close to the regimes, the deep state, all of them. So I don't take anything that they say seriously. The Israeli regime can't carry out an attack on Iran with any success. It's just not doable. The attack, their strikes that they carried out on Iran, it was with U.S. support. The Americans were the force behind it. That was very clear. The Iranians knew. And it wasn't very successful anyway. But if the Israelis do try to attack, that first of all, that means the Americans will be a part of it. Then the Iranians have a huge excuse to really go hard, to hit them very, very hard in a way in which we haven't seen before. And you know that the Iranians still plan to strike Israel. I mean, some people are skeptical about it, but that's what they were saying about the true promise, true as they called it. What has put it on the back burner for now was first the fall of Syria, because Iran had to move things around with regards to its air defenses, because Syrian airspace was now open to the Israeli regime. And then there were the secret negotiations that were taking place after Trump was elected between Hamas and the resistance and the Israeli regime, and Iran did not want that to fall apart. So that has basically, but this war is not over. And there's a significant possibility that we could have fighting in the weeks or months ahead. And ultimately, I think there will be war at some point. This situation is not going to remain as it is. So, if the Israeli regime attacks, it will be with American support. If they do, then I think the Iranians will strike in a way which we haven't seen anything like before. I'm sure the Americans don't want that. Remember, this is Israeli first policy. The Israeli lobby in the United States does not care about the United States. The Israeli lobby in Europe does not care about Europe. They're willing to sacrifice America and Europe for the Israeli regime. There's no doubt about that. They're willing to bring down the global economy for the sake of the Israeli regime. So they will push in that direction. But I think that Trump and others recognize that a regional war would bring down the global economy. And if it's just an Israeli strike against Iran, the Iranian response would be devastating, and then that would put the United States in a very awkward position, because either they'll have to accept Iran's counterstrike, which will be devastating, or they're going to get involved. And if they do, that will bring down the global economy. So It's complicated. It's again, it goes back to what we were discussing earlier. The United States knows, I'm sure that any sane person in the United States knows that Israel is detrimental to the interests of the United States. Israel's existence is a burden to the United States and the Europeans. But they have a stranglehold over the country, and that's how things stand. So we'll have to see how things play out.
In your opinion, the governments in the Middle East, Arab states, Saudi Arabia and UAE, are they as you know that Egypt came out with a new plan for rebuilding Gaza without displacing people from Gaza, which was supported by Saudi Arabia, it seems, and UAE. How is that going to play out for Donald Trump? Are they going to accept? Are they going to go and find a solution for Gaza, or they're going to insist on what they were talking about, just displacing people from Gaza? And on the other hand, don't you think that the way that Donald Trump was talking about Palestinians, Gazans, I don't know, somehow forced these Arab states to go and find some sort of solution? Egypt, after all, after many years talking about a new plan on their part, they want to participate. How do you see the dynamic between the reaction coming from the Arab states?
Without a doubt, what Trump has done does not serve U.S. interests. He has humiliated these governments. He's humiliated Saudi Arabia, $1 trillion, $600 billion investment in the United States. Saying if they want me to go there, they have to invest this much, and then when they say they will, they said, "Well, make it $1 trillion." It's all humiliating. When the Netanyahu says, there can be a Palestinian state inside Saudi Arabia, that's humiliating. So Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, they're all being humiliated by the United States. That's not smart, and by the Zionist regime. That's not smart. It pushes them away from the Western camp. Of course, these regimes are deeply compromised. Remember, all of the princes in Saudi Arabia, all of the elites, or almost all of them, they travel to the West, they study in the West, they have interests in the West, and that makes them, the West has files on every single one of them. I'm sure. There are many Epsteins out there in the West, and all of these people, sure they're, or many of these people, I'm sure they're compromised. So, so the United States has a lot of influence inside Saudi Arabia, inside Egypt, inside the Emirates, inside Jordan. But again, but on the other hand, the United States is on the relative decline, and we see the rise of new powers, and we see that the United States is weakening these regimes by humiliating them. They're humiliating the governments, they're humiliating the people, and so they're creating an incentive for these governments to move away. And of course, it's not just the Israeli, it's not just Gaza and the Israeli genocide, it's also Syria. Because by bringing in Al-Qaeda under Biden, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, these same governments, they are concerned about Al-Qaeda and Wahhabism and Salafism in their own country. Then they are humiliated by the West, so they have to start looking for alternatives to protect themselves, and that can create an incentive for improved ties with Iran. That can create an incentive, which we do see happening, by the way, with some of them at least. That creates an incentive to work more closely with Russia, with China, and with non-Western countries. So the more the United States humiliates these governments, the more the Israelis humiliate these governments, the more incentive there is for them to come up with these alternative solutions, which means, at least formally, they're opposing the United States. And that I think, is not a good sign for the United States or Trump.
How about the internal policy of Iran? Many people are asking, and they want me to ask you, how do you find the position of the current government? The way that Donald Trump is talking, how is this sort of rhetoric on the part of the United States influencing the position of the new government in Iran, the Pezeshkian government?
Well, Nima, you know what you know what I've been saying for many years now, and that is that what happens in Iran is always caricatured in the West. So if you have debate in Iran, they say it's division. They say it's unstable. In the West, they call it checks and balances and democracy. On a number of cases, I told Western, I think I was on Times Radio, I told them that in our society is more open than yours. And they was like outraged and said, that's ridiculous. Like, if you say anything contrary to what you're supposed to say, you'll get in trouble in Iran. Whereas the reality is that when Syria fell, for example, there was a segment of Iranian elites who have media, who have Telegram channels, who have offices in Tehran, who have newspapers, who have websites, who took the position of the New York Times and the Washington Post. The liberals in Iran mimic their policies. They support their policies. Some liberals in Iran. But in the Western mainstream media, you'll never see anyone opposing US policy towards Iran, opposing US policy with regards to Palestine. There's consensus. When it comes to Russia, it's because of the circumstances that under Trump that came out. Otherwise, until Trump came to power, there was a consensus. And until a year ago, Democrats and Republicans are all on the same page. But in Iran, you have people who oppose everything literally everything that the state does, as and especially among this liberal class. And they're open about it. They have websites. They have their political parties. But again, it runs against this narrative of Iran being horrible and despotic and evil and intolerant and all that. So I don't really push this too far, because in the West, you run into a brick wall. They are so incapable of comprehending reality. In Iran, there's always debate, and right now there is debate when it comes to the resistance, when it comes to the region, and when it comes to negotiating with the United States. That debate exists. But the differences that exist among the political elites, if you remove the extreme factions from whatever side, the divisions are not all that deep. The leader ultimately said no negotiations with Trump. At least for the time being, no negotiations. The president supported it, and so did all the other elites. Why? Because I think the leader, he waited. When Trump was elected, he listened to what was coming out of Washington. Probably they were definitely monitoring the situation, U.S. actions, statements coming out, and ultimately they saw that this was under the current circumstances, there was no way that we could have negotiations with the United States which would bear any fruit, and where the United States would not try to manipulate the Iranian public opinion and to create problems for the economy. The United States right now, from what we've seen, wants Iran to not just give up key parts of its peaceful nuclear program, but it also wants it to give up its conventional defense capabilities. That's foolish. And so, and the United States is threatening Iran. So under such circumstances, why should we talk? Even if we do not feel that we're in a position of weakness, the Americans are going to interpret it that way. So he said, no, we're not going to negotiate. And the president agreed with him, and fully agreed with him. So I think it shows that the elites in Iran, who are serious people, who are not trying to play to gain public opinion, to get public support at the expense of others, because of their selfish interests. I think, contrary to those sort of people, the key players, the key individuals who are involved in developing Iran's foreign policy, sat down and thought through this and rationally came to the conclusion that negotiating with the United States is not a good idea. And I think that that debate is over. Now, when I say the debate is over, does that mean that those liberals, pro-Western liberals, are going to go quiet? No, they're going to continue advocating appeasement and advocating submission or negotiations, depending on which particular faction you're looking at. That will always exist. And I think that just shows how tolerant Iran is, contrary to what the West pretends it is. But I think the debate is over. And I agree. I don't think that we should be negotiating with the United States. Does that mean that we will never negotiate with the United States in the future? No, of course not. It doesn't mean that. But under these circumstances, while the United States is behaving in this way, negotiations will not bear fruit. In fact, they will probably hurt us. So we shouldn't be doing them. If the United States fundamentally changes its position towards Iran, behaves reasonably, stops threatening Iran, recognizes Iran's sovereignty, then that would be a new day and possibly a new chapter in the relationship. But at the moment, we don't see any sign of that.
If you were to mention the main point in Iran's leader decision, what would that be that he doesn't see that the United States is serious in what they're talking about negotiations and all of that on the part of Donald Trump?
I think one is that the United States is untrustworthy, and two, that the United States has unreasonable expectations. And the United States is untrustworthy because every time that we've dealt with the United States, they've cheated us, they've lied, they've cheated, they've lied, they stole, as the former head of the CIA once said, because they're exceptional. They think they think that they're above the law. You have to abide by your commitments, but we don't. That's the U.S. mentality. Once Clinton said that, actually, he said that the United States always abides by its commitments unless we choose not to do so, unless we think that it's no longer necessary to do so. And when he said that, the whole audience laughed. That's why I think he was president back then. That's the mentality. And how can you deal with such a regime? The second is the United States wants to take away your sovereignty. You cannot have missile defense capabilities. You cannot have a peaceful nuclear program. You cannot, but we can threaten you with all options on the table. The Israeli regime can have nuclear weapons. That's not going to work. And Iran is not Jordan. Iran is not Turkey. Iran is not Egypt. Iran is not Saudi Arabia. Iran is fiercely sovereign, and the Islamic Republic of Iran will defend its sovereignty, and it will defend its allies. And so I think that the United States, the problem with the United States, Nima, is things like USAID. What they do is they fund these people, these so-called Iranians, who are basically, the house slaves or the comprador class or the Orientalized Orientals. They fund them. These people, of course, they carry out anti-Iranian propaganda, BBC Persian, VOA Persian, Iran International, all these other hundreds of media outlets. Then these people, they also pay through the US government, the US senators and the US officials and congressmen and women. So the US government is paying itself to be a part of their lobby. And then they tell them what to think about Iran. And from the very beginning, they say what the United States wants them to say. So these officials are corrupted, and they're sitting in an echo chamber. And so the United States never understands Iran, nor do the Europeans. So Iran is always about to collapse. Iran is corrupt. Iran is about to just one small push and it's over. and and Iran has been on the verge of collapsing for like 30 years now, according to these people. It just doesn't happen. So because of these narratives that they pay for, they miscalculate. And because they're always hopeful that the regime, as they like to call it, is about to fall, just like Putin. Putin is about to fall, he's losing the war. It's the same thing. Because they're always hopeful that it's about to fall, they say, well, no, let's not negotiate in good faith, let's not seriously negotiate, because so it's going to go, the regime is going to fall anyway. So why should we negotiate with them? And that's why the United States shoots itself in the foot. And that's how they do it, at least.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. I hope that the way that Donald Trump is trying to manage the situation with USAID would influence at least the situation with Iran, because as one of the people who's receiving money from USAID, which is not happy right now, he's Russian. I'm sure that you know him, Gary Kasparov. He's so prominent in terms of chess, and we know that Iranians who are connected with this guy, who are receiving the same sort of money and who have received the same sort of money from USAID, but as you've mentioned, that doesn't work. There is no realistic view on their part.
It's much worse than Russia when it comes to Iran, because the United States and China, because the United States has invested in these anti-Iranian media and these anti-Iranian groups for decades. In the case of Russia, it's more recent. There are people, I think, in the West they don't appreciate what the United States is doing. The United States has hundreds of media outlets that are in Persian, TV channels, websites, they have tens of thousands of people, not thousands, tens of thousands of people who are directly or indirectly funded by these different organizations. People across Europe, across North America, in camps, all sorts of television stations. Lots of people are funded as a result. It's a big business. And so, because back then, remember, Iran was the axis of evil. Russia and China are, they've now emerged as the enemy, let's say. But 15 years ago, it's just Iran. In 2000, when Bush made his axis of evil speech, the state of it was his State of the Union speech. That was 22 years ago, 23 years ago. Things have changed since then, but the anti-Iranian funding began long before, and it was much more extensive than Russia or China. But in any case, I don't think that there will be a huge change, because who is the Secretary of State of the United States? Is he someone who is opposed to regime change? No. So I think it's going to create some difficulty, because this transition is going to be disruptive. And also, I think the United States economy really is in crisis, something that I think we're going to see play out in the coming months, probably. So it will be more difficult for the United States to manage this, but I don't think the United States has changed in nature. There may be some people in the Trump regime that would want to end this. I can think of a couple of names, or at least people affiliated to it. But I don't think the people around Trump really are thinking all that different from previous groups. But we'll have to see. Ultimately, I don't see Trump as being able to turn the ship around, even if he wanted to. And I don't think that's exactly his objective. But the United States is in serious trouble. I think the divisions there, the deindustrialization of the United States, the rise of alternative powers, These have brought around about a new global situation and has weakened the United States, relatively speaking. If the United States really wants to turn this around, they have to change the nature of it has to change the nature of its relationship with Iran as well as Russia. But again, as I said before, I think that huge lobby that they've created, which is very well funded, and the Zionist lobby that's behind this, I think they make it almost impossible. And that's why I think that it's the elites in Iran, those who are in charge of the decision-making process about foreign policy, think that talking with the United States under these circumstances is not going to bear fruit.
Thank you so much, Professor Morandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you very much.
And Israel. The Syrian issue shows United States what Erdogan can do for United States and Israel. And now the term is Iran. Openly in Turkey now, people, journalists, academicians, politicians who are close to the government, even some representatives of the governing party, they say that now we will get rid of Iran openly.
To carry out regime change in Iran.
Yes, for sure. And even they are telling that there might not be an Iranian state. You know the problem with the Azerbaijani part of Iran. There are millions of people living in Iran who are, in fact, Azerbaijan people, especially mainly the Tabriz area. And now there's a real conflict going on with Azerbaijan, with Aliyev and the Iranian state. So the tension is increasing. And you have to take into account that Azerbaijan, although a close ally of Turkey, is also a very close ally of Israel, and they are pumping oil to Israel. During all those terrible events in Gaza, Aliyev regime in Azerbaijan, they didn't do anything for Palestine, and they continued their cooperation with Israel on the military field and in energy sector. And now Azerbaijan is trying to provoke Iran with Turkey. So how can we say that Erdogan is threatening US interest in the region? They got rid of Assad. Turkey did nothing to support the Palestinian people except talking and talking and talking. And now Turkey is threatening Iran, which is, of course, on the table for United States and Israel. Of course, I am not saying that, as you said, Turkey is not a puppet of United States. Turkish capitalism cannot be a puppet of any actor. They have their own agenda, they are trying to benefit, but they are cooperating with United States in a very businessman style. They know how to increase their price. For example, in Ukraine, they didn't join to the sanctions against Russia, but they are sending a lot of military equipment to Ukraine. So they are playing to both sides. But in the last analysis, Turkey as a NATO country is helping Ukraine, not Russia. In Syria, Turkey tried to at least have some cooperation with Russia. And then in the end, it was Turkey who helped all those jihadists to get rid of Assad, and of course, it destroyed Russian interest. So I want to say that New Ottomanism is an ambition of Turkish capitalism to become an imperialist country. But we are thinking that although Turkish capitalism has some strength and it has the support of a very strong state, in the end, this will also question the existence of Turkish Republic. In this region, we don't think that the balance of power and imperialist projects will let a strong and enlarged Turkey, because Turkey is now trying to achieve an agreement with some political forces of the Kurdish political forces so that there will be an alliance of Turks and Kurds so that the Turkish influence in the region will increase.
What you're saying, first of all, just to summarize real quickly, is that having succeeded with the fall of Assad, with the toppling of Assad, which is not a popular uprising, but international players playing a dominant role, including Turkey, but United States, Britain, and Israel, that they also have a sense of potential that if they can carry out regime change in Syria, maybe they can carry out regime change in Iran too, which is a much bigger prize, of course. And that Iranian society, like many of the societies in the Middle East, but many societies everywhere, has ethnic diversity, and that there's an Azerbaijan population, and that the Azerbaijan government, formerly a government which was one of the republics of the Soviet Union, but now in the camp of counter-revolution and working with the US and Israel and providing oil for Israel, could sort of find a way to support the movement, so-called movement of Azerbaijanis in Iran to help try to, one, overthrow the government in Iran, or actually dismember the existing Iranian state. And I think it's a really important point that you're making, because if you go back to Yugoslavia, which you talked about in 1999, Yugoslavia was a multinational socialist state. It had, whatever one thinks about the Milosevic leadership, it came about, its existence, Yugoslavia came about after World War I, but became a socialist multinational republic after World War II. And Yugoslavia was broken apart. Yugoslavia was dismembered. The Soviet Union was dismembered. When the U.S. looks at China, when they think about Xinjiang or Tibet or Hong Kong, they're also thinking, well, we could break up these bigger countries. And now, having sort of succeeded at the toppling of the Assad government, U.S. imperialism and Israel and others perhaps now thinking, well, let's carry out regime change in Iran. But the other point that you're making is that in spite of the expansionist desires, the neo-Ottoman project of some sectors of the Turkish ruling class, Turkey itself could be susceptible to a kind of dismemberment. And I think that's really important, because the dominant imperialist powers, the number one or number two, or the center of world imperialism, American imperialism and British imperialism, they would prefer to have smaller states, weaker states, more easily dominated states, because ultimately they don't really care about the form of governance in any of these countries. They care about their own imperialist interests. The form of governance is sort of pretextually used to say, oh, we're fighting for democracy here or democracy there. But underneath all of those words, those euphemistic words, those noble sounding phrases, it's a very expansionist, very predatory system. So you have Iran, and even you're saying, and I think this is so important, even Turkey itself. So as Turkish communists, you're fighting the class struggle against Erdogan, but you're also aware of the potential dangers from world imperialism about Turkish sovereignty. Anyway, I'm sort of summarizing because this is complicated. And if you don't know the geography and we don't know the players, it might get a bit confusing. But I think this is an important thread that you're going down, because this is what American imperialism and British imperialism and the Zionist regime are undoubtedly thinking about.
Sure. You see, openly, some representatives of Erdogan government and even Erdogan himself, they were saying that before the fall of Assad, they were saying that there's a threat against Turkey from our side. So we should try to solve our Kurdish problem. So there is a new attempt to have negotiations between PKK and the Turkish government. It's going on for 2 months now. It started before the fall of Assad.
Yeah, and the PKK is the Workers' Party of Kurdistan. Is its name.
Yeah. And one of the supporters of Erdogan told that it is Israel threatening Turkey. So we have to consolidate inside the country in order to avoid this threat. So what they mean about the threat? It's the Kurdish issue, because Turkey's main ethnic issue is the Kurdish problem. And Kurdish problem is very sensitive, as there are Kurdish population in Syria, in Iraq, and in Iran, as well as Turkey. So there are mainly Kurds are living in 4 different countries. In Iraq, the Kurds already have their own, okay, it's not called a state, it's called an autonomous region, but actually it is like a semi-state. In Syria, they have a region which is threatened by Turkey, but most probably they will have an agreement. And it's an oil-rich region in Syria. It's an oil-rich region in Iraq, the Kurdish part of Iraq. So they already managed to actually split Iraq and Syria in reality. I mean, not only with the Kurds. In Iraq, there are different ethnical compositions, Sunnis, Shiites. In Syria, there are the Durzis, the Christians, the Shiites. So in practice, both these countries, Syria and Iraq, are divided. And now Iran. In Iran, there are 2 main ethnic minorities. One is the Kurds, and the other is the Azerbaijan people, which we cannot call a minority because they are very strong in population. If things go like that, if we have either new states or autonomous regions, this will affect Turkey for sure. And what Turkey is trying to do now with a new Ottomanist philosophy is to try to form a Sunni axis. You know, there are 2 main sects in Islam world. One is the Shiites and Alawites. They have some differences. In Turkey, we have Alawites. But the other sect is the main sect in Islam, Sunnis. What Turkey is trying to do is to build a Sunni axis. That includes the Kurds, because the Kurds in the region are mainly Sunnis. Okay, there are Shiite Kurds also, but the main part of the Kurds are Sunnis. So the Sunni Arabs, Sunni Turks, and Sunni Kurds. So Turkey is trying to use this as a new enlarged Turkish Republic, which we call Neo-Ottoman. Okay, it should not be an annexation. For example, the Iraqi Kurdistan, especially the Barzani part.
In Iraq, inside of Iraq.
Yes, it is like Turkey, because the main economic actors are Turkish businessmen. There are a lot of flights, daily flights. So if Turkey manages to have an agreement with PKK, then things will be more easy to have cooperation, to have relations. Maybe the borders will be relaxed. So it will be like a free zone, let us say, for Turkey. And the interesting thing is, PKK is also saying this. Their leader in the jail for many years, Öcalan, the leaders who are in Iraq, in the camps, they are saying the same, saying that if Turkey makes an agreement with us, if there will be a Kurdish-Turkish coalition alliance, Turkey will become a real power in the region. If not, this will be an end of Turkey. So PKK is nearly saying the same thing. Of course, they say this for bargaining purposes. It's a carrot and stick policy. And Turkish state is also doing the same, saying PKK, leave the arms, make an agreement with us, so we will have peace and we will have a strong Turkish Republic. But the problem here is nobody will let Turkey to use the Kurds and Sunni Arabs to become a real force. No, United States, other forces, and we should take account Iran. Iran is still existing. All the forces in the region and strong imperialist countries, they will not let Turkey become a real force, because that region is also a region with a lot of resources, oil. But not only this, all this region is important because of its routes for trade and energy pipelines. China is also trying to build its own trade and business lines through this region. There are lines trying to be built to Israel. So it is strategically very important region, and nobody will let Turkey to control this region itself. So what we believe is they will use Turkey. Maybe there will be an agreement between Turkey and PKK. Then they will use it against Iran. And afterwards, we will face either with new ethnic problems, or we will face with an issue of a joint, for example, Kurdish state. Okay, I'm not going to get into a discussion here, but a joint Kurdish state means land from Iran, land from Iraq, land from Syria, and land from Turkey. And that will create a real problem. So I'm afraid if we don't manage to unite all the people in all ethnic origins on a class basis, this region will witness new massacres, new wars, new invasions, new annexations. Now the Pandora box.
Kofi, follow me.